Hello and welcome to a new installment in my video analysis series. In this video, I want to talk to you all about Compulsion Games' latest game, South of Midnight. This game was a blast and is seriously so beautiful, both in design and storytelling. I was ugly crying a few times in between chapters. It's just so good. And the story is the reason why I want to talk to you guys about this game, because you know your girl loves a story about breaking generational trauma, and that's what this story has in spades. Along with deep Southern folklore, personal traumas, economic hardships, the disappearance of small-town America, the terrible realities of gentrification, and many, many instances of lost, regret, and a little redemption. This is going to be a long-ass video, so buckle up. In this video, I will be covering the basic development of the game and its critical reception before diving into the possible inspiration of the game's story and art style, followed by a chapter-by-chapter breakdown of the characters and events as they unfold on screen. With that said, this video will leave no stone unturned, so if you don't want spoilers for South of Midnight, I recommend coming back after playing the game yourself. With that out of the way, let's talk about the development of South of Midnight. When development officially began on South of Midnight is currently not on Wikipedia, and I can't find an official date on any other searches using Google. However, we do know that leaked information, mostly just concept art, for the game began back in 2021, so it's safe to assume that it was in development at least in 2021. More information on the game would come out 2 years later at the Xbox Game Showcase in 2023, but an official gameplay trailer wouldn't be released until April of 2024, where its animation got harsh backlash. This is because of its emulation of stop motion, and how that made the game look like it had a seriously low frame rate. With this backlash, Compulsion Games added a feature that would eliminate the artistic choice if it proved too much for players used to 60+ FPS. In my experience, after 3 minutes of gameplay, you don't notice the illusion of the slow frame rate, and the charm of some of the creatures and enemies moving like stiff marionettes remains intact. Compulsion Games had help from Clyde Henry Productions to make the clay marquees that were used to create the unique art style of the game. This would be Compulsion Games' first IP while under Xbox Game Studios, with the company being bought back in 2018. Compulsion Games only has 2 other titles under its belt. We Happy Few and Contrast, 2 games that got decidedly mixed reviews from major critics and casual players alike. Unfortunately, South of Midnight doesn't necessarily break out of this pattern. While reviews are significantly better than Compulsion Games' previous titles thanks to the story, setting, animation style, and atmosphere, the gameplay has a lot to be desired. It's a very pretty platformer, but it's incredibly basic. At no point are you having to puzzle out exactly how you're supposed to get from one place to the next. It's very straightforward. The combat is by far the weakest aspect of the game, with only 7 different enemy types known as Haints that you encounter over and over again throughout the narrative. The first time you encounter a new Haint is novel and challenging, but by the 3rd time you're facing it, you know all of its tricks. The worst part is, you have to clear out at least 3 zones, called Stigma, of these enemies in each level before you can move on to the boss. And while the boss battles are all unique and the music that accompanies the battles make up for the lackluster repetition to whittle down their HP, they aren't the most challenging battles, which is disappointing given the game's marketing as an adventure platforming game. I personally didn't have a problem with the gameplay, as the story is so great and the battles are never so long that it feels like a slog to get through them. But I can see where others might find the combat to be too boring, as I find myself sometimes dreading the 5 minutes it takes to clear up a patch of Stigma. And I noticed something that I haven't seen being talked about in other reviews for the gameplay, and that's how it feels like a cool eclectic mix of a bunch of different games. I would say the combat is very similar to that of God of War's, but slowed down to be closer to Prime Matter's The Chant. Now, don't crucify me in the comments, please let me explain. God of War's combat is much faster paced with a lot more abilities and smoother movements, and these improvements are significant and make God of War's combat so impressive and fun. But if we take the basic elements of the combat, repetitive enemy types, closed-off combat zones with different waves of monsters, unblockable attacks with visual cues on the enemy's health bar, it's a nearly 1-to-1. It's interesting to see how 2 combat systems could look so similar but be so miles apart in quality. Then there are sections after clearing out all the Stigma patches in the level where it feels exactly like playing Temple Run, with more complicated but slower platforming. There are also some elements of the combat that remind me of Alice Madness Returns, with the fanciful dodging and some of the upgrades and how they work. I did not expect to be doing so much secondary research for this video, but I got 3 minutes into replaying the game to take notes and immediately had to start finding resources for different details. I found documentaries, YouTube videos from college professors and essayists, and I went hunting for different obscure music references throughout the game. And it's thanks to this research that I now understand that this game isn't just heavily inspired by Black, Southern, and African folklore, it's a love letter to those traditions and people. As someone outside the community this game honors, I want to approach these traditions with care. While I can't speak from lived experiences, I've done my best to research and cite sources that reflect the game's cultural roots. And most of these homages are found in the different artistic choices made throughout the game, and we will begin with the inspiration of the gameplay, stop motion, specifically claymation. The claymation visuals unfortunately don't have any direct links to deep Southern traditions, but it could still be linked to African pottery traditions and sculpted face jugs, or it could be paying tribute to David Drake, also known as David the Potter, a 19th century slave turned freeman born in South Carolina. I also like to think that the claymation style was inspired by Key and Peele's claymation movie Wendell and Wild, but there is currently no evidence of that. While the claymation doesn't have any direct links to the Black Deep South, the cutscenes between chapters might. These sections of the game use visuals that are reminiscent of woodblock stamp art, the repetition of bold lines and imagery overlapping one another. These visuals are probably inspired by 20th century Southern Black artists who used linacre and woodblock print techniques to create art that told stories, memorialized ancestors, and demonstrated protest against systemic oppression and Jim Crow laws. The color blue is incredibly important in Southern African American folklore and culture, specifically the Gullah people, and some African traditions, specifically the bottle tree, and the color is heavily woven into the game as well. Haint blue refers to the color found on porches throughout the Deep South. It's a color said to ward off negative spirits and looks a bit like robin's egg. There's a famous painting by Annie Lee called Blue Monday that is represented in the game itself. You can see a version of it hanging on Hazel's living room wall. If you want to learn more about this painting, please find the link below to Kemi Karim's quick visual analysis of the painting. It's very informative. The design for Crouton, a cute but slightly odd-looking doll who joins our protagonist on her journey, also pays tribute to the Gi-Ben quilting, an African-American tradition that has survived generations of slavery and Jim Crow laws. The style of quilting is still practiced and celebrated today by the direct descendants of the women who preserved it. The title card of the game is introduced through a very charming claymation, showing us two rabbits at a table handing over a book to a strange, supposedly self-animated doll, who takes it and begins a quick trip to a house in the middle of a swamp with a tree that has blue bottles enclosing its branches. At the same time, we see our protagonist slowly meandering to the same house. We think the strange doll and the girl will meet, but when our protagonist hops up onto the porch of the old house, she only finds the book and a record player spinning, with the doll hiding under a window in the house a second before. When the protagonist looks at the book, we see our title card, South of Midnight, stamped onto the front page. This opening animation is brilliant. The game itself will only emulate stop motion during cutscenes and throughout the movement of monsters and some other small creatures. So having a full cutscene dedicated to the craft that inspired the visuals of the game is a great homage. We also get to see the mystery of the game in some capacity. What is this doll? Who is this girl? And why does it seem like the rabbits are conspiring for something? It's an excellent hook. And with the music on the record player and the swampy environment around the abandoned house, we get an in-depth look at the game's general aesthetics. Now, the claymation opening was truly just for the title card. After you choose your difficulty setting, we get the official opening. It's an animated linacre print storybook being narrated by our jovial voice of exposition, the Catfish, who we will officially meet in a little bit. And he begins to tell us a story about the tapestry of life, something that binds all things together, and a person who was born with a gift to weave that tapestry, to mend it of snags caused by deep emotional pain, snags that grow and take on life of their own, known as Haints. While Haints in this game provide a very artistic lens in which to explore the world and the physical repercussions of deep-rooted trauma, this idea of Haints is very much from historical context. I've linked a video titled Haints and Gullah Ghosts in the description. It's a clip from a documentary on the Gullah people and their spirituality, and the cultural influence it had on Southern Black culture. It's incredibly informative and hosted by Dr. Damon Fordham and Chieftess Atun Ogechi-El, both of whom are experts in Black Southern folklore and history. This idea of a tapestry woven by emotions, tangled by pain, feels deeply rooted in African and Southern Black storytelling traditions, where craft and narrative have always been intertwined. Whether it's quilts, face paints, tattoos, linacit prints, or bottle trees, these art forms often serve as memory keepers, emotional maps, and communal stories stitched together by hand and heart. The next pages in the storybook show the modern town of Prospero, and the catfish tells us about a girl named Hazel and how her mom was running late, driving home in a hurricane. This opening is very well done. It gives us everything we need to know going into this world of Prospero, who our protagonist is, and what the immediate circumstance is, all without overstaying its welcome, while also providing stunningly beautiful visuals that pay a deep homage to 20th century Southern Black artists. As you can see, this game is very well thought out. And now on to Chapter 1. We meet our protagonist, Hazel, and we immediately learn that she is a track star, with her reminiscing on her last track meet she went to with her team and absolutely smoked the competition. She has a very distinct style, both sporty, tank top, running shoes, very practical sports bra, and urban punk, ripped jeans, nose piercing, shaved eyebrow, jacket around the waist. We get a sense of the life Hazel and her mom, Lacey, live by looking around the house and hearing Hazel's thoughts on everything she can focus on. We can see Hazel really likes horror movies and comic books, with big posters of both hanging on her walls. We come to understand that Lacey has been a bit absent from Hazel's life during her teen years, and this is due to the nature of her mother's work. We will learn that Lacey is a social worker, so that makes sense why she would be too busy for Hazel. Social work is an incredibly stressful field, and I respect Lacey so much for fighting the good fight. Despite Hazel's current frustrations with Lacey, we can also see, through interacting with Crouton on the couch, how much love there is between the two of them, even before her mother comes back home. Even though Crouton is the furthest thing from a typical children's doll, Hazel openly loves him. And he's cute as hell, so there's no way that she wouldn't like him. But still, we can tell that a large portion of her love for Crouton stems from her love for her mother. And when Lacey gets home, that's when we see why Hazel loves her mom so much. They truly get each other. They move in sync with one another, finishing each other's sentences and getting ready to leave as quickly as Lacey arrives. Hazel is trying to be the stereotypical teenager with a chip on her shoulder, throwing barbs at her mom about how she was all alone while the hurricane bore down on the house. But Lacey knows how to move with the punches, taking her daughter's negative energy and turning it into compliments and playfulness. Besides, you're spry, my little track star, and Hazel, think fast, before throwing Hazel her track shoes. This tactic works really well, as Hazel's energy becomes happier and the two of them start a little chant, one that seems to be common one sung during a hurricane: pack a bag and pack it light. And they do a silly little dance like I was just doing. But this peace between them doesn't last long. Hazel can sense that this hurricane is different somehow. It's fiercer, more wild and unpredictable. This uncertainty has shaken her. She asks her mom, "Do you think this place will still be here after?" And we can see this fear grows in her, and like most people when scared, she begins to lash out. "We wouldn't need to rush if you weren't wasting time down at the shelter." And her mom's patience wavers at this, and it doesn't help that Hazel sucked her teeth and mumbled at Lacey, two things you don't do to your mother unless you want hell's wrath at your door. But you also feel for Hazel in this moment. She's being very brave in expressing her feelings. "You left me to prep for a hurricane by myself," which is a huge emotional toll for anyone to take on by themselves, let alone a teenager. And it does seem like Lacey just isn't getting it, dismissing Hazel's worries, and then getting fully frustrated when she brings up her grandmother, Bunny Flood. We don't know much about Bunny Flood yet, but even her name carries weight in this moment. The tension she brings into the room by being mentioned hints at a bigger story, possibly one that ties in the game's themes of generational legacy. We'll find out. Looking at the picture of Hazel and her dad, we learn that Hazel's father passed away some time ago, and talking about Hazel's dad makes Lacey very emotional. And while we don't know why Lacey and Bunny have bad blood between them, we can see that all the emotions Lacey feels when talking about her late husband turn negative when talking about her ex-mother-in-law. Lacey tries to send Hazel to the neighbors to check if they need some help, and now Hazel loses it. They might need some help. We might need some help. I might need some help while you're out helping everybody else. This game doesn't pull punches when it comes to emotional conflict. And sure, some of it's a bit spoon-fed to the audience, but that's not a bad thing here. The dichotomy in Hazel with her mother is so rich with nuance that handing the first bite to the players for free is well worth it. Hazel admires her mom and her work and everything she does, but she can't find a balance of that admiration in her rising sense of neglect. Yes, she's getting older. Yes, she wants to be treated like an adult. But like all people, no matter their age, she still longs for her mother's nurturing attention. She wants a shoulder to cry on, someone in the stands cheering her on louder than anyone else, and someone to soothe her when the lightning strikes. It's heartbreaking, and it speaks to the human experience of growing up and having the desire for both independence while still yearning for parental protection and guidance. We get a small connection of the theme of traditions and craft passed down through generations when Hazel accidentally breaks her mother's mug, which we learn was made by Hazel's great-grandmother. The mug itself is layered with meaning as well. It was a clay ceramic mug with a stencil of a tree stamped into it, bare branches reaching into the sky. Let's ignore the fact that most mugs are already ceramic and try to see the importance of why this mug looks like it's obviously made of clay. The most immediate connection I make is to the claymation style the game constantly emulates. The second connection is to what we discussed earlier in the clay and stamp work of African and deep Southern Black Americans that define generations of tradition and culture. Another possible moment of theme poking out is when Lacey says, "We are going to Jolene's church with everyone else, like we always do." While the always do part might be related to themes of tradition, I think it's the with everyone else part that is emphasized here. Bunny is known to sit in her big mansion, untouched by the hurricanes and the rest of the town and its worries, while Lacey is very much a part of the local community, and she lives in a trailer hanging over a rushing river. I think that the game is drawing a contrast between the isolating safety of wealth and the vulnerable strength of community, between sheltering yourself and showing up for others. Yes, the mansion would be safer, but Lacey would rather stay afloat with her community than do what she believes would be abandoning them. The argument between Hazel and Lacey continues until Hazel storms off to go check on Bo and Mrs. Pearl. Lacey stops Hazel at the door, telling her, "Everything I do for you." And Hazel replies with a cold look and a whatever. And we can understand why Hazel was so cold at the end as we take control of her movement and she says, "There's just no getting through to her." Which makes me think that this is a conversation Hazel's been wanting to have for a while now, but either can't get Lacey to have it, or can't get herself to confront her mother in a real way, instead of a jaded teenager way. Bo doesn't offer much to the story or analysis, so I'll be kind of skimming past them. Both he and Mrs. Pearl are Hazel's neighbors, with Bo being a 40-something with 3 dogs, and Pearl seeming like a stand-in grandmother for Hazel. She isn't in the game for very long, but she does a lot in a short amount of time she is on screen, offering Hazel fresh cooked food, endless empathy, and trying to give Hazel some perspective about her mother. She probably acts as a guide and confidant in Hazel's day-to-day. But it's the small details that really make Mrs. Pearl stand out. There's a lot of pieces of foreshadowing in the scene with her. Let's first look at the figurines on the windowsill. A mermaid carved of wood, a crocodile, an owl, and a pink spider-looking lady, aka not Mommy Longlegs. These all represent the different bosses Hazel will be fighting in the game to come. Then there's Mrs. Pearl's beaded necklace. This one item is layered in so much meaning. Superficially, the necklace is a statement piece, probably a part of Pearl's Sunday best, which is a part of a long-standing tradition in Southern Black culture to exemplify a person's individuality, their pride, and their dignity as a people. These beads also hearken to diasporic African traditions, being symbols of protection, connection to ancestry, and can even mark a person as a leader in a community. The bigger the jewels, the bigger the presence. And this fits Pearl's persona as a guide and confidant for Hazel. And the protection aspect ties into the game's idea of Haints as spiritual beings made of raw, negative emotion. Going a step deeper into the sudden Mrs. Pearl's necklace iceberg I found myself, the symbolism of pearls themselves really fits into the themes of the story. Pearls represent transformation and endurance, beauty made of grit and time spent living. Pearls are considered timeless and are gifted as heirlooms, especially among Southern Black Americans, where they are traditionally handed down from grandmother to grandchild. This ties into the themes of legacy and heritage in the game. And finally, these beads could be a part of the echoing motif of Southern Black folk art in the game, along with the Lineage storybook sections, the bottle trees, and crouton, of course. So yeah, these 2 minutes with Mrs. Pearl is stacked with symbolism that could be missed in an instant. Oh, also we get the foreshadowing to what's about to happen to Hazel's house, as we continually cut to raging waters hitting the post supporting the house over the river. And sure enough, the house gets taken by the river, with Lacey still inside. There's a real blink and you'll miss it foreshadowing to the end of one of the game's levels when Hazel drops the spider figurine on the floor and it shatters, which I will talk about when we get to it as I don't want to spoil the heartbreaking moment too much. Hazel chases after the house, and it's exactly like Alice chasing after the white rabbit. And sure enough, Hazel is going to fall into a world of wonder herself. For when Hazel catches up to the house, she jumps on the roof, then falls into the river. In narratives centered on marginalized communities, the motif of the fall into another realm symbolizes a profound intersection of temporal and spiritual dimensions. This narrative device reflects a collision between the past and the present, the tangible and the ethereal, the personal and the ancestral. We will see this is especially true later when Hazel comes in contact with the echoes of a weaver who used her powers to lead slaves to freedom. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Can you believe this is only the first 10 minutes of the fucking game? Anyways, instead of drowning or being carried down the river, Hazel is saved by a magical force that brings her back to where she was before she jumped on the roof. This is a classic platformer mechanic. The protagonist misses the jump and is teleported back with little damage taken. But the way they blend storytelling into the game mechanic is so badass and emotionally effective, it takes the game and the story to a whole new level. What makes this even more interesting and fantastic is how they don't actually make Hazel abscond to a different universe. She is very much exploring the backwoods of Prospero. But giant trees, the fantastical flowers and views, a mountaintop, and the Louisiana swamps? Not likely. And the creatures she encounters all make it feel like she stepped through the looking glass. By making the fantastical environment Hazel explores an actual part of her real world instead of a whimsical dimension, it grounds the game in the genre of magical realism. Magical realism, for those who don't know or need a quick refresher, is a genre of storytelling where magical elements exist alongside the ordinary world. But unlike urban fantasy, the magic isn't hidden or secret, it's treated as normal, is often grounded in folklore, spiritual traditions, and cultural memory. Magical realism is most powerfully used in stories centered on marginalized communities, where the blending of the mystical and the mundane become a way to explore identity, history, and survival. In South of Midnight, yes, magical things need to be explained to Hazel, and her reactions are those of someone who's never seen the mythical before, which technically breaks genre convention. But everyone else in her life acknowledges the magic as something that has always been there, including Lacey, but we'll get to that. And the magic she encounters isn't a fantasy escape. It's rooted in the very real folklore, grief, and spiritual strength of the Black South. In that way, the story doesn't ask us to suspend disbelief. It asks us to recognize belief that's already woven into the world. As Hazel resumes her chase of the house, she gets to a bridge and can almost reach her house again, but the rapids pull away too quickly. Hazel shouts in frustration, "I wasn't fast enough! I'm always fast enough!" This line reads like a crack in her emotional armor, a sign that Hazel's self-worth might be deeply tied to her speed. Maybe track is how she defines herself. Maybe it's one of the only ways she feels seen, especially by her mom. We're told multiple times that Hazel is a track star, both from her and from Lacey, so this emphasis has to mean something. I'm not sure what the full weight of that line is yet, but it feels like it's going to matter later. But as Hazel continues, she sees her grandmother's mansion, sitting unaffected by the storm, and Hazel believes Bunny can help her. What she thinks her wrinkly old witch of a grandmother is going to do about a house floating down river? I don't know. But wealth does seem like magic sometimes, so maybe she's hoping Bunny can pay for a miracle. We get this really cool segment of Hazel running through Prospero during the storm, cars and light posts being hurled at her by the storm as she screams for help from anyone who might hear her. But it might as well be a ghost town for all the people we see. Speaking of ghosts, as Hazel runs, she gets to a French Quarter-style cemetery, and we get this amazingly cinematic shot when the jazz music playing softens, and Hazel sees her dad's grave. The wisteria over his mausoleum being Haint blue is so poetic. Hazel stops for just a second to say to her dad, "Hey Dad, headed to your old place. Have no other option." It's so casual, so open. It takes someone who truly understands love and loss to talk to the dead in such a familiar way. And then she asks him, "I'm so scared for Mama. Dad, if you're up there." She begins to run again. "Keep her safe." And the music picks right back up with its blaring horns. It's such a powerful moment that it almost made me miss the legwork the designers were putting into the background of this game. Right before Hazel gets to the cemetery, she passes a building with a raven spray painted on the side. But it's not just any raven, it's the raven. Poe's raven. Nevermore is quoted next to it. This raven is a visual anchor of Hazel's inner turmoil. The past she had, the home she had, is gone forever. Nevermore. Her dad is gone and has been for a while now. Nevermore. And now she is facing the possibility of losing her mother, too. The raven is seen as a messenger of death, and is haunting how we get this imagery right before being confronted with her father's death again. But where Poe spiraled in the finality of loss, Hazel reaches for hope and continues to race forward. It's a profound reversal that tells us that this will be a story of grief, yes, but also of resilience. Hazel reaches the Flood Mansion, and of course, is a plantation house. For those who may not know, plantation homes were historically owned by white slavers in the American South, and they now stand as painful symbols of violence, exploitation, and the dehumanization that slavery inflicted on black people. These grand homes remain monoliths to a legacy of greed, built on suffering, and their presence carries weight far beyond aesthetics. In the context of the game, it represents who Bunny Flood is as a person, and, to quote the in-game lore text on the house, "The Flood Mansion sits on a hill, towering over the town of Prospero. It's a monument to Bunny's power and influence in the town." We learn so much about her before we meet her, and we can maybe infer why she might not like Lacey and keeps Hazel at a distance. But those years of distance and neglect don't matter to Hazel at this moment. She barges into the mansion once Bunny's maid, Lily, opens the door. And then we meet her, Bunny Flood, and she looks just as pompous as we got the sense she would be from how other characters have talked about her so far. There's a hurricane outside. She was supposedly resting, and this woman is in a full two-piece suit, flowered heels, hair coiffed to the gods. She was not resting. But that doesn't matter. Hazel asks Bunny for help, and Bunny agrees, though she's going to wait until the morning. This clearly stresses Hazel out, and she starts talking about the strange things she's been seeing, like the strands of light that saved her from the fall in the river, and the monster she saw in the distance after her house pulled out of reach the second time. We see that Bunny recognizes what Hazel is talking about, but she says to Lily, "My granddaughter is clearly out of her mind with worry for her mother. Make a room for her, please, Lily." And then Hazel starts to get unnaturally sleepy when Bunny runs a hand over her forehead. And we get the sense that Bunny Flood might actually be an evil witch. And then Hazel is out. She wakes up in a dream space, and she sees the strands again. We can now see the flower details in the strands, marking these ethereal lights as a power rooted in nature. They also whisper Hazel's name, dozens of different voices, all of them young girls. We learn that these strands connect Hazel to every weaver that has come before her. What is a weaver? They are people born with the ability to mend the tears in the tapestry of life. Okay, that's great, but what the fuck does that mean? You might be saying to whatever device you're watching this video on. Well, if you'll be patient, I'll explain. I mentioned the tapestry briefly, and the game itself doesn't go into much detail about it. But what we need to know is that the tapestry is everywhere, and Hazel can see its strands. And we learned the tapestry can be altered, frayed by negative emotions. When these strands get out of hand and begin to develop haints that can alter the natural world, that's when a weaver is born. Hazel isn't just on a journey to save her mom, she's on a journey of self-discovery that's steeped in sacred ancestral connection. Along with being able to see the strands clearly, Hazel meets a mysterious figure standing next to a peddler's cart pulled by a giant boar. His name is Rue, though you don't know that unless you have your subtitles on, and he seems to be able to see Hazel. He doesn't stick around to answer any of Hazel's questions, he just says that it's strange that she's there, then he vanishes. Hazel then comes across her house, then a window, the window we last saw Lacey standing by, shouting at Hazel not to jump. We then see Lacey suspended in the air as if floating, insinuating that she had succumbed to the waters. But a mechanical hand the size of a gorilla snatches her body, and Hazel wakes up in a cold sweat. This is our first indicator of what the strands connect Hazel to, distant places and events that have gone past, to moments of extreme emotion and import, as we will be seeing the owner of that hand sooner rather than later. After Hazel wakes up fully and remembers where she is, she realizes that Bunny has locked her in a bedroom. And as she bangs on the door, dark, sporous materials bloom around the doorframe and she flinches back. Then a balcony door bangs open, and we see an owl watching Hazel. Just the first of many creatures who silently observe or seem to guide her along the way. And this might be to represent some African and Black American folklore. For an owl specifically, traditionally they are seen as death birds, like ravens, but instead of being harbingers of doom, they are heralds from beyond the grave, typically seen as a sign of ancestors watching or a coming transformation. We will also see the rabbits from the title animation again, and these guys most likely are referenced to the Brer rabbit, found in Black Southern folklore. Professor Damon L. Fordham made a YouTube video discussing the Brer rabbit. If you want to learn more about them and how they could connect to the story of South of Midnight, I've added a link to his video in the description below. Hazel finds her way around the outside of the house to the mansion's library, where she can find a journal entry written by Bunny, talking about the strands Hazel has been seeing along with something known as stigma. So yeah, Bunny was definitely lying about thinking Hazel was just seeing things due to stress. Hazel will also find a secret staircase behind a bookshelf by moving a rabbit figurine. Again, this is probably the Brer rabbit, hiding secrets and leading the way all at once. Hazel is also beginning to hear singing, a sound that Bunny's note says she could not hear no matter how hard she tries, and the singing leads Hazel to these large silver hooks glowing with blue and white strands. When Hazel picks them up, they move the strands around Hazel effortlessly. These are her weaver's hooks, passed down from the last weaver, finally finding the person meant to inherit them. Bunny keeping the weaving hooks locked away in a secret library feels symbolically loaded, especially given that Bunny is a white woman and Hazel's legacy as a weaver is tied to a Black ancestral lineage. These tools, clearly magical and deeply tied to emotion, memory, and restoration, are rightfully Hazel's to inherit. The in-game text tells us the land chooses the weaver, but the fact that both known weavers are Black women, and that the last one used her powers to help enslaved people escape, gives the hooks a powerful cultural resonance. Bunny's decision to hide them, paired with her gaslighting and attempt to sedate Hazel, reads like an act of control, and perhaps even fear. The implication is heavy. Bunny may have kept the hooks to retain access to sacred power she wasn't chosen for. This becomes a powerful metaphor for appropriation and legacy theft, echoing real histories where Black indigenous knowledge, tools, and spiritual systems were suppressed or co-opted by white institutions. The symbolism is undeniable. Hazel's journey to reclaim the hooks is also a journey to reclaim identity, ancestry, and power that was hidden from her. Hazel's on a big journey, guys. She's going to be doing a lot of legwork here, both physically and mentally, and spiritually. Lots of legwork. Hazel escapes the mansion. Well, actually, she falls off a balcony when it crumbles beneath her, but she finds out the strands negate fall damage under certain circumstances, and she walks through a garden of that rotted-looking fungus she saw back when she first woke up. She sees it is covering the house, filling every nook and cranny, and she realizes this must be what Bunny called the stigma. She finds a knot of dark energy in the garden, a snag in the tapestry, and uses her hooks to unravel it. A taste of the metaphor these untanglings will mean in the game to come. The hooks are the mode in which Hazel reaches into the past and mends the damage done to the hearts of the people and creatures found at its center, healing generations of pain in the area, and bringing hope and life to a place that was fit to decay in more ways than supernatural. The theme of the disappearance of small-town America and gentrification are played heavily in these moments. Prospero, as we will find out, has been slowly dying thanks to the greed of Bunny Flood and her desires. The poorest members of the society were preyed upon, creating large swaths of stigma that rotted the soul of the town. Hazel isn't just rescuing her mother, she's on a mission to restore life back to a dying community. And now we move on to Chapter 2. Can you believe that was just Chapter 1? Anyways, Chapter 2, Other Voices, Other Looms. Hazel enters the forest proper, where most of the game will take place. Here, the beauty and the ethereal nature of the game really shines, with the impossibly large trees, the patches of wildflowers blooming in a riot of colors, the misty dawn light casting a dreamlike glow on everything, the animals watching Hazel from a distance and not moving when she approaches, and tree-trunk-thick brambles with thorns bigger than swords. Now, it truly feels like Hazel has entered Wonderland. In choosing to make the setting of the game where the protagonist meets supernatural creatures and forces, where she transforms into a different version of herself, A forest really ties to some African cosmologies, where they see the forest as a liminal space where people can commune with their ancestors. As Hazel moves through this mystical forest, she recognizes that this doesn't look like anywhere she's seen in Prospero before, but she knows it will connect her to the place where her house must have washed ashore along the river. Oh wow, and Hazel even mentions that how this area looks like it belongs in a folklore like the Brer Rabbit, and I didn't know that there was a direct reference to the story in the game itself. That makes me both proud that I made the connection before the game explicitly mentions it, and kind of embarrassed that I forgot that piece of dialogue existed in the first place. Oh well, I'm not editing anything I've already analyzed. Anyways. Now we get to our first bit of combat, and it's exciting and fun as the creatures begin to form out of dark snags in the strands and Hazel whispers, "Oh hell no." I want to bring up the chant again, as when I first encountered a combat zone, I couldn't help but make the connection to that game, with the big menacing aura being the indicator for a place of no return. A few things I forgot to mention before about combat are, if you do a perfect dodge, it creates a sonic boom of strands that parry the monster. This kind of reminds me of the timing mechanics of Soulsborne games, where timing a parrying attack can stun an enemy. There are little health wells you can use during combat to heal in case you get hit too many times, and killing and unraveling enemies, going up to the enemies' dead bodies and pressing Y, drops health nodes, which makes the already easy combat a complete cakewalk. But again, the first battles with each new Haint is exciting and novel, and when Hazel clears out the heart of the stigma, flowers bloom around her, adding more beauty and wonder to this already gorgeous game. Now, the combat is probably where most of the criticism comes in for this game. The combat isn't groundbreaking, and the pacing might feel uneven if you're not fully bought into the world. And that, I think, is part of why the game sits at a 77 on Metacritic. It's a game that demands emotional and thematic investment. If you're not here for the folklore, the grief, the slow unraveling of community trauma, you might bounce off of it. And I think part of that lies in how this game is marketed as an adventure platformer first, not a story-driven game with combat and platforming mechanics. I believe if Compulsion Games advertised South of Midnight differently to reflect what the game actually is instead of what they thought people wanted it to be, then it would have been a lot more successful. But I am only a story analyst, not a marketing analyst, so I may be way off base. So let's get back to where my powers thrive and talk about what happens after Hazel's first encounter with Haints. Hazel begins to hear the singing again, and she comes across a well and jumps in. Again, we are treated to the same imagery of Alice entering Wonderland. Okay, the fall isn't that far, and we don't get a psychedelic montage of images like Alice's typical fall, but when Hazel comes to the end of the cave, we are greeted with a spinning wheel and a loom. I don't know about you guys, but my mind immediately went to the story of Sleeping Beauty. And while there aren't any direct ties to that particular story in the game, the invocation of a fairy tale was the point. The imagery grounds us in the idea that Hazel is not necessarily in the world we once knew. It is so interesting that they do this, because as soon as Hazel picks up the singing loom, we are greeted by ghosts of the past, the last weaver, Mahalia, and a black couple and their son as they escape slavers to get to freedom. The juxtaposition of the fairy tale imagery along with the very terrifying realities of slavery might seem disconnected, but I think it's an expertly crafted blending of the magical and the mundane that solidifies the genre of magical realism. There's also a brilliant inversion here as well. As the fairy tale spinning wheel and the loom are physical things Hazel can touch, the specters are exactly that, memories of the past that Hazel cannot change or interact with. Again, this juxtaposition gives the players a subconscious understanding that we are witnessing the echoes of real histories through the lens of the mystical, and it's so well done. Mahalia turns around before the vision fades, and her eyes are on the camera, or Hazel as we watch the ghost leave through her perspective. And though she is talking to the people she's saving, it feels like she is addressing Hazel and the player instead. "We got a long journey ahead," she says. And she is correct, as I am on page 13, single-spaced, of this analysis, and we haven't even gotten to the 40-minute mark into the game. There is a piece of imagery on the wall behind Mahalia before she vanishes that caught my attention, but I can't quite decipher it. We see a cracked mountain, a church, a tree, and a Haint blue star. I know the mountain, tree, and church all represent places Hazel will visit, and I believe the middle horizon lines represent the river, but I have no idea what the Haint blue lines in the star could mean. If anyone has any theories or explanations, I would love to hear them. Please, tell me. Even after finishing this whole analysis, I still don't know what those things could mean. At the end of the cave, Hazel will untangle another stigma to clear a path, and this will unlock combat upgrades. The upgrades offer a variation in combat strategies, such as doing ground slams, bringing enemies closer while stunning them, and reflecting projectiles with a force push-like move. Honestly, a lot of these upgrades remind me of playing as a Star Wars Jedi, and I wonder if the thematic connection was intentional or not. Jedi and Weavers are both chosen by an unknowable force to bring balance to their universe, so there is a very strong link between the two titles. And while Jedi are trained to detach, to cut off feeling and remain neutral, Weavers are the opposite. They lean in. The threads respond to emotion. The pain matters. You can't fix the tapestry without touching the wound. Anyways, learning to master these upgrade abilities can be quite fun, but I think getting the upgrade material itself, called floofs, is where the upgrades really improve the game. Acquiring enough floofs to get any upgrades requires the player to explore every inch of the game, meaning you get to see more of the gorgeous scenery. And this will lead players to more readables and lore components that adds context to the game's already impressive story. Again, how this works out makes me believe that this game was created with the intention of being a story-driven game with combat and platforming mechanics, so why they chose to advertise it as just an adventure platformer is beyond me. Hazel makes her way out of the cave and to the river's edge, and she comes across a place that she mentioned not wanting to have to go through. On the outskirts of Prospero are a series of abandoned areas, mostly reclaimed by nature, that are filled with the echoes of pains of the past. Hazel not liking these areas tells us that she has always been able to sense the trauma in the tapestry of life, even if she is only now able to see and touch it. There's a really interesting moment that happens as Hazel approaches this area. She kneels down and touches the earth before touching her heart. She doesn't explain the gesture, and the game doesn't call attention to it, but it's layered with meaning. Layers, so many layers, it's like I'm dealing with another fucking onion. I do love that I can bring up a Shrek joke in almost all of my videos. It's so good. But anyways, in many African and African American spiritual traditions, the earth is sacred, a resting place for memory, for ancestors, for pain that has settled into the soil. Touching the ground could be a form of reverence, communion, or spiritual grounding. There's a really great documentary hosted by Toriana Ball called Uncovering the Power of Hoodoo, an Ancestral Journey, that might add more context to this gesture than I feel like I could, in good faith, cover in this analysis. But by touching her heart afterwards, Hazel may be warding herself, centering herself, or simply acknowledging that she feels something heavy beneath the surface of this place. And that matters, because this game doesn't always explain its magic. It trusts us to recognize it. I think it's this section of game where the Haint Blue guideposts become more prominent, so let's talk quickly about it. Harkening back to the color blue and its importance to the game, Haint Blue is the color the developers use to help guide the players through the platforming sections. This is another example of how the game expertly blends storytelling with game mechanics. Where other games seemingly haphazardly choose white or yellow to help players find the safe path, due to the outstanding nature of those colors, South of Midnight choosing Haint Blue makes it feel more like Hazel is being guided by her magic or spirits instead of it just being a game mechanic, and that's cool. Following the Haint Blue ledges, Hazel will find her way into one of the abandoned buildings, where she will find the final piece of her weaver equipment, her weaving spindles. These spindles will help her cast her most useful spells, a summoning spell that brings echoes of past objects into the present for Hazel to manipulate and utilize, and a binding spell that stuns enemies and makes them susceptible to attacks. Thematically, this connection between past and present is brilliantly done. As we see Mahalia use this spell to rescue the family, Hazel will use this power to rescue her mother. Running around the abandoned town, Hazel can find firefly lanterns and constellations painted on the walls of buildings. Of course, these images are painted in Haint Blue. And these are messages left behind by Mahalia to Hazel. The imagery of the firefly lantern, and especially the constellations, mark Mahalia as Hazel's spiritual guide through her transformation as she travels through the forest and swamps. Hazel finds her way through another cave, following the ghost of Mahalia, and she begins to question why she was chosen by the land to be able to see stigma. And maybe we'll find out those answers as we move into Chapter 3, A Big Fish. Hazel continues her journey to the river, following the trail left by Mahalia, and she learns more traversal abilities, the double jump, the gliding jump, and she will eventually learn the wall run, but I'll talk about it here. The mechanics of the double jump and the wall run are less woven into the story than other mechanics, to the point where I can't even really make an argument on how the developers tried to link it this time. The gliding jump fares about the same, but with the addition of Hazel really enjoying the gliding ability. The girl has been through a lot. It is nice to hear her enjoying herself. Imagine discovering you have all of these cool magical abilities, but you can't enjoy them because you are literally racing forward to make sure your mother isn't dead. Actually, that kind of seems like the plot for a lot of, like, superhero magical girl kind of situations. Still, it's fun. At the end of the gliding section, Hazel comes across her mother's work binder as it lays in the center of a spider web. She reaches out for it, and as she touches it, we are back in the dream world Hazel found herself in earlier. Like before, we are greeted with a vision of Lacey, and she begins to talk freely about the binder as if we were hearing her inner monologue. She says she hates her binder. It's like opening Pandora's box, and she desperately wants to protect Hazel from the emotional toll she takes from her job. However, she recognizes that this shielding is not protective. It causes strife and distance between them, and the unspoken part is, she doesn't know how to rectify it. This is the beginning of how the game frames Lacey as a person, not just as Hazel's mother, and we get this framing through Hazel herself. As she comes across more visions of her mother's inner voice, Hazel recognizes that Lacey is and always has been human, perfectly capable of making mistakes she knows she shouldn't. This is an impossibly hard lesson for children to learn as they become adults, but the game tackles it with nuance and patience. It's simply lovely every time I come across it. This also calls back to Lacey's words to Hazel at the beginning of the game. "The world existed long before I brought you into it, Hazel Flood." And I think that really speaks to the theme of generational trauma. As part of breaking the pattern in most situations, we need to recognize our own humility and see the humanity in our parents and their parents before them. That way, we can start doing the work of mending the wounds instead of rehashing them. Seeing Lacey not as an opponent or a martyr, but as a whole person is the first step Hazel takes towards healing. And speaking from personal experience is also a step many of us are still learning to take when it comes to processing our traumas that our parents may have given us. After all, forgiveness is letting go of the hope for a better past. Hazel worries that these visions are proof of Lacey's passing, as they feel like confessions to a higher power. But she doesn't have much time to work that worry, as she hears a voice calling out to her in the swamp, and she comes across the catfish. The catfish is probably most people's favorite character, including mine, with his sultry voice, rolling Creole accent, and playful way of being both wise and silly. I love his design, and I wish there was some in-game text to explain him. He looks stitched together, with his scales textured like fabric and glowing embroidery. His design is also split down the middle, the right side detailed in oranges and sunlight, and the left being blues and the swirls of midnight. His eyes are opposites as well. The right eye seems mechanical and glowing blue, and the left eye the same orange and fire of the sunlight embroidery. He's just a captivating creature, and he offers a lot of exposition in this story as well, acting as a more practical guide for Hazel as he tells her how to mend the tapestry using her tools in a wishing bottle to contain the negative energy. The catfish offers his help in exchange for some assistance in turn. A giant peach tree named Benji had scooped him up during the storm and hasn't let him go. Being a giant magical fish, he doesn't have to worry about dying from exposure to air, but he wants to be free to swim as any other fish and asks Hazel to hurry. There's also these really cool catfish down in Florida that actually walk from one pond to the next if they find that the pond or water system that they're in is starting to dry up. I think they're called mud skippers. That might be the wrong term. I'll have to look it up later, but I'm not going to correct myself in this video. But please feel free to correct me in the comments. Before Hazel goes, the catfish tells her about how this world is made up of those glowing strands she sees in a grand tapestry. And when someone or something experiences unfathomable trauma, it tangles and knots up these strands. He tells her that Benji probably left knots all over the place, and to help Benji let go of, literally the catfish and metaphorically the past, she must unravel those knots. This might be one of the more fantastical places that Hazel explores, not because of the nature of a talking catfish and a giant tree with hands and a face in the side of it, but because this area is in a constant state of early dawn, the fine mist shrouding the trees and shanty houses, with giant peach trees laying about everywhere. These peaches are a clear homage to the 1996 claymation movie created by Henry Selick and Tim Burton. James and the Giant Peach. They somehow made the peaches in this game more appetizing than that movie's peach, which had romanticized the flavor of peaches for me in my brain for decades. So thanks Compulsion Games for reigniting that craving. At least I'm in South Carolina, so I can get a good peach cobbler whenever I want. As Hazel comes across a rundown home at the edge of the river, an old bottle tree in his front yard, we are introduced to Rhubarb, an off-kiltered individual who will be very important despite his frantic tinfoil hat-wearing nature, and the fact that we never actually see this version of him again. This is also when the game enters its anthology section of storytelling. A major selling point of this game was showing and exploring different Southern Black folklore that had previously never been represented by game media before. And the way the developers decided to do this was through an anthology-style section of stories. I think this was really well done. As we move from area to area, we get to meet different people, both standing members of the town with deep histories and those connected to Hazel directly, and help them heal from their past pain. With the boss fights and their songs acting as a closing chapter to that story, and letting the player know that they are moving on to the next level, the game maintains a grounded structure. There's something I want to address now that we've seen more of the story, because it's been bothering me. During my research, I came across several reviews that criticize South of Midnight's structure, calling this storytelling messy or disconnected from Hazel's arc. But I believe that critique reflects a misunderstanding of the genre, not a flaw in the game itself. This isn't a traditional hero story. It's magical realism. It's Southern folklore. It's about the invisible threads of grief and loss and memory and forgiveness that weave through every encounter Hazel has. The so-called side stories aren't distractions, they're reflections. They echo Hazel's internal journey, sometimes more clearly than she can express herself. If you're only looking for a linear progression in high-stakes combat, you'll miss the emotional precision the game is built on. Which brings me back to the Metacritic score, that's 77. That number doesn't surprise me, but it does feel shallow. Scores like that often reflect how well a game meets conventional expectations, not how deeply it delivers an artistic intent. And South of Midnight was never trying to be conventional. If you came looking for spectacle and overlooked the soul, that's not on the game. To acknowledge one strong critique I found for the storytelling, the cast of characters is a bit too broad for a 12-hour game, and because of that, some character stories, like Bo and Shaken Bones, are delegated to hidden readables across the map. But as those characters have very little screen time as it is, it doesn't feel like that much of a loss. And the fact that we have hidden backstories on them shows that time and consideration was put into every character, even if it's not given a dedicated cutscene or song. The reason I think this anthology style works so well is because it follows an almost episodic nature, like an old cartoon, where the majority of the episode is dedicated to an isolated but thematically relevant problem that's resolved by the end of the episode, but has moments at the beginning and the end that carries a connecting overarching plot. Which we see here, as Hazel's journey to rescue her mom, heal the wounds of a dying town, and connect with an ancestry she was cut off from before now. They aren't recreating the wheel here in a methodology, but they are pushing the limits of how effective this type of storytelling can be, and that's paying off in gold. Now, with that spiel out of the way, let's get back to the story. Rhubarb is such an interesting character. Though he might just seem like a whack job in a dying town, he verbalizes in-game what I've been speculating so far in this analysis. The stigma and Haints are poisoning the town, driving people away, which in turn perpetuates the suffering. But there is a very important part of the story of Haints that Rhubarb forgets, or at least isn't taking full consideration of. Stigma isn't created from nothing. It comes from the suffering of others. Someone started the poisoning, and if the player is sharp, they will find readables that point a finger at Bunny Flood, as every eviction notice on every building bears her name and signature. Okay, it's not just Bunny causing the pain. Rhubarb mentions something about all of this starting when his brother went missing. But, as we find out, Rhubarb's brother didn't go missing. He's only a few hundred feet away, towering over the swamp and dropping peaches the size of school buses on the houses around him. There are so many fun readables you can find throughout this part of the game, talking about spectral lights out in the water called Frivolet, a Creole version of Will-o'-the-Wisp, with deep ties to swamps in the bayous of Louisiana and Mississippi. Like will-o'-wisps, the Frivolet are known to lead people astray, but in this case it's to their possible doom via drowning. I like that the game frames the way people experience Frivolet through the themes of greed and survival, showing how people have died and are willing to send others to their deaths for the sake of a possibly sunken treasure. After some more exploration, Hazel will find a large knot of stigma that creates a dark vortex in the strands around it. And after unraveling this knot, Hazel is brought back to the dream world and begins to witness a memory from the past. We get the catfish's narration as the spectral image plays out, showing a young Benji and Rhubarb. He explains that Rhubarb couldn't forgive his brother for being the reason that they moved to Prospero. Benji, while never explicitly stated to have a mental disorder, was probably autistic or even possibly gay, with the catfish alluding to it with the turn of phrase, living in his own world. But that's just speculation from an autistic gay kid. Benji feels familiar, but familiar doesn't always mean the same. After the vision ends, an image appears like embroidery in the air, and Hazel uses the blue bottle she got from the tree to capture it. This in turn heals the stigma. Going from stigma to stigma in this area kind of feels like exploring a Dark Souls level. As you twist and turn around the impossible landscape, you find yourself circling back to the catfish, though this time on a branch you didn't know you could traverse when you first get to the area. It's very good map design when it invokes the feeling of a Dark Souls level, that's all I'm saying. The next vision was hard for me to watch, and I had honestly forgotten about it, so it was just as shocking seeing it the second time. The catfish explains that the people of Prospero were no different from the people in their last town, and once they found out that Benji was different, again only vaguely hinted at what this difference is, they started throwing rocks at him. But what makes this vision so hard to watch isn't that the rock hits Benji, but rather a rabbit he was playing with, and the rock kills the rabbit instantly and Benji breaks down sobbing. Those little shits are so lucky Benji is the soft kind of autistic gay. If someone killed a rabbit I was playing with, those Frivole wouldn't have to work very hard to get drowned bodies. They'd have me as an express delivery system. The third vision shows how the town was escalating in its tricks and terror, setting a bear trap for Benji that could have taken off his foot. The catfish explains how Rhubarb took this as a sign that things were going to get scary again like they did before. And while we can see Rhubarb defending and rescuing Benji in this vision, from the music we can learn that his resentment of Benji is growing. But I'll talk about the music in full in a moment. First, I want to talk about the final vision and the boss battle, or lack thereof. The final vision shows Rhubarb snapping at Benji, the catfish explaining that he had enough of taking care of Benji. He wanted to see what he could do without the burden of his brother. After collecting the vision in the bottle, Hazel remains in the dream world, and a voice says to her, "You shouldn't be here." And it's the same voice as the guy with the cart pulling the giant boar. Rue. He doesn't sound like that, I just made up a funny voice. Though again, you still won't know his name unless if you have the subtitles on. As the shadow with a twin star begins to form behind Hazel, the bottle begins to pull her away from the shadow. These are the temple run sections. As Hazel makes a mad dash away from the shadow, you have to use every traversal skill you learned in the level before in order to make it to the finish line. And in this game, the finish line is the golden barrier surrounding a flowering bottle tree, a place where Hazel disperses all the negative emotions she collected and learns the pattern she needs to weave in order to heal the wound. When Hazel makes it back to the catfish, he gives the dream world a name. He calls it the Weave. Fitting. He also talks to Hazel about the pattern that she got from the bottle tree, and how personal it was to the events that transpired. We got a hint of this idea before from one of Mahalia's notes, but in this moment we are given an understanding that being a weaver is a lot like being a social worker. It's rewarding and good work, but it's work that can whittle away your spirit if you take on too much at once. And we can fully understand this notion when Hazel untangles the big knot at the base of Benji's tree, and we see the ending of Benji's story. Rhubarb tricks Benji into a hollow tree, and we get another Edgar Allan Poe reference, though this time his short story, A Cask of Amontillado, and Rhubarb seals Benji in the tree. Evoking the Cask of Amontillado tells us everything we need to know about the story of Benji and Rhubarb. Like Munchausen, Rhubarb enacts his cruelty under the guise of civility. He lures Benji in with words of familiarity, using trust and friendship as tools of betrayal. And like Fortunato, Benji doesn't realize he's in danger until it's far too late. The act of sealing someone away, whether behind brick or inside a tree, carries the same horrifying implication. You are being silenced, buried, and made to vanish without anyone knowing. And yet, unlike Poe's story, where vengeance is central, here it's grief. Rhubarb doesn't kill Benji for revenge. He does it to destroy what he couldn't control, the soft, strange beauty of someone he could never understand. And that hits a little too close to home for anyone who's been othered and punished for it. The powers of the land took pity on Benji in this final moments. Seeing the cruelty he had endured his entire life, they gave Benji a new beginning by fusing him with the hollowed peach tree. While this magic didn't give Benji the peace he needed, evident by the knots surrounding his tree, he was free to love the world around him without the fear he once had. Though I personally wouldn't call this a blessing until Hazel came by and rewove Benji's heart. And now we are given the entirety of Benji's song. Or is it Rhubarb's song? The song is from Rhubarb's perspective, but is clearly about Benji, so I guess one could argue either point. But I hate Rhubarb for what he did to Benji, so he doesn't get to have ownership of the song. It's Benji's. Plain and simple. Anyways, music is a huge part of this game, as it is arguably a huge part of Southern Black culture. From jazz to blues, this game is swimming in swinging orchestras of brass instruments with the best beats you've ever heard. I wish I understood the language of music better, but like poetry, I can't explain how the details make the piece a technical marvel. I can only relay the emotions they give me when I experience it. While I can't speak on the jazz ensembles and how a lull in a certain note in one section of the game really exemplifies the story beat the creators were going for, there are parts of the game where we do get music with lyrics that read like any other story, which is what we get here. But I wish I could analyze how the chords they chose make those boss scenes hit every emotional beat perfectly. I hope somebody who watches this with musical knowledge will make an analysis on the music of this game. It truly deserves an hour-long video discussion itself. It's so good. But in the meantime, I did find a video series by the composer of South of Midnight, Olivier de Riviere, where he talks about each piece individually and the score of the gameplay as well. I've linked the playlist in the description below if you want to check it out. The song especially hits hard when you hear the remorse in the verse, "I took my hammer, my ticket to hell." I think the climb up Benji is one of the most emotionally resonant parts of the game. The beauty of the flowers all throughout Benji, and the sunrise casting everything in golden lights, coupled with the heartbreaking song, it makes for such a lovely and soft moment. I think Benji's story is supposed to mirror Mahalia's story of the first time her powers led her to helping someone. The moment is layered in wonder and kindness, and the softness in which Hazel requests Benji to let go of the catfish shows how Hazel was born for this work. Something I didn't notice on my first playthrough, the background music in each level slowly adds lyrics as you clear out more stigma and uncover more of the level story. It's such a clever and emotional design choice. The more we learn, the more the music reveals, building tension not just mechanically, but narratively. By the time we reach the boss fight, you're hearing the full version of the song. It is no longer just atmosphere, it's context. And in de Riviere's video titled Benji, Song Deconstruction and Rebuild, he talks about how this was his intention, to allow the players to build on the music as they explored, just as they were building their knowledge of Benji's story as they explored. So let's look at Benji's level a little bit closer. By the time you clear out the second stigma, you still don't know exactly what happened between him and Rhubarb. You've only caught glimpses. But now the lyrics fill in the emotional gap. He was my brother. He was my shame. That line breaks something open. Suddenly the tragedy isn't just visual or environmental. It's musical, emotional, alive. When you finally reach their childhood home, you can infer that the kook by the bottle tree is Rhubarb, a fact you can confirm early if you have subtitles on, and that his missing brother is in fact Benji. It's brilliant storytelling through music, an evolving layer of foreshadowing and heartbreak that hits harder with every note. It's immersive, it's emotional, and it's devastating in the best way. Ugh, my heart. As we finish this first level, I want to talk about level design a bit more. I touched on how impressive the map design was, with traversal slowly circling back on in itself in ways you didn't notice the first time you went through the area. But I also want to talk about the environmental storytelling in the game. Throughout the level, we can enter a few individual homes and explore the porches of many more. And through this, we can infer the life that once prospered in this shanty town. We can find a home filled with children's drawings depicting a child's happy life with their dad. We can see that there were talent shows and farmers markets. And we know that this wasn't long ago that this all changed, as Rhubarb is still around and doesn't look much older than 50. This kind of visual storytelling adds layers of weight to the theme of gentrification and disappearing small-town America. It's not an inevitability. It's a tragedy that affects everyone involved. We'll learn later that Bunny evicted everyone in the area so that she could excavate Benji's heart without being observed, making her almost Scooby-Doo style villain. A lot of transitions between levels happens by Hazel traversing the river. which is incredibly thematic. In folklore across cultures, rivers are rarely just water. They're boundaries between life and death, sin and salvation, oppression and freedom. For many, the Mississippi River carries echoes of the Nile, the Ganges, or of the Styx. It's not just a southern landmark, it's a threshold, a spiritual force. So to have the spaces between chapters and levels be moments of moving across the river, it tells the player that we are transitioning to another realm entirely. This helps aid the transition from one story in the anthology to the next. After healing Benji and meeting up with the catfish on the river proper, Hazel hops on the back of the big fish, and they head to where Hazel's house should have washed ashore. There's a brief moment where Hazel asks the catfish if he's ever been helped by a weaver, since he knows so much about the practice, but he deflects the question. I mean, it's pretty obvious he is the creation of a weaver due to his physical body being made of cloth and embroidery, but it makes me hope that a DLC will come out for this game that explores the catfish's backstory. But until then, we are now entering Chapter 4, Wicked Temper. The opening of this chapter is the section of the game released for the gameplay trailer back in 2024. But now we have some context, and what the catfish says to Hazel helps again to solidify the genre of magical realism, as he is genuinely shocked that Lacey has never told Hazel about the magical things in the world. Now, this could be because Lacey didn't know either, but given the evidence we get later in the game, I can't help but to wonder why Lacey was protecting Hazel from this knowledge. It kind of feels like not teaching your kid how to run away from an alligator when you live in Florida. It's knowledge that can save their life someday. Don't withhold that information just because the reality of it is scary. Speaking of gators, we are then introduced to the island-sized gator known as Two-Toed Tom, inspired by the real-life legendary gator with the same name that once haunted the Alabama-Florida area back in the 1920s. The game even alludes to a part of the legend, one of the many failed attempts to kill Tom with dynamite. It's a clever use of folklore and boss design that adds more historical context to the game, but it's truly the events around Two-Toed Tom that make his story so compelling. The catfish tells Hazel to go ring a church bell in order to scare Tom off. But we quickly learn that the catfish's information isn't quite right, and Tom comes running towards the church, ready to devour the bell and Hazel along with it. We will find out Tom's real deal with bells soon, but first, Hazel comes across another object from her house, a framed drawing, made by one of the kids that Lacey helped. In the vision we see of Lacey, she talks about how pulled apart she feels, but why she continues to do the work. We don't know the context of how she got the drawing, but she says that when she looks at it, she could kill a man from all the pain she feels. And she holds this pain close to her to protect Hazel from it, to make the world a better place for Hazel to grow up in. This vision forces Hazel to confront her mother's humanity again, but also her mother's strength. And her admiration for her mother grows as she realizes how much Lacey must take on every day, especially after comparing what Lacey does with what Hazel did for Benji, and she says, "That sounds so hard. Mama must have seen some pretty messed up stuff, and I struggled with just seeing what Benji went through." I love the organ music as we get closer to the church and we travel through an old graveyard. It's so haunting and a bit cheesy, and the combo is so much fun and adds levity to the moment, which is a very welcome tone, because I don't know about you guys, but the idea of an island-sized gator bearing down on me for a mid-morning snack is shit in my pants worthy. And my heart genuinely drops when Hazel jumps off the roof right before Tom's giant head breaches the water and crushes the church with a single leap. But that's it for this chapter. I don't know why this chapter is so short, especially because that was only a taste of the shit Hazel is going to get into with her dealings with Tom. Maybe it's to break up the exposition, or it was to act as an introductory chapter for Tom, but nevertheless, we move on to Chapter 5, Everything That Rises. This part of the game sees us outside of the forest and along the banks of the flooded river. The catfish leaves Hazel, as a hog farm flooded and this part of the river is polluted with pig manure. The small detail in section of the game shows the devastation that natural disasters can have on both the town and its surrounding wildlife, as the waters rise and take all the human filth and mixes it together in a disgusting flood. I'll talk about the level design before we get into what happens here on the riverbank. Being outside the forest, this level feels more grounded in reality. Hazel maneuvers over waterlogged cars, past piled-up trains, and through landscape that looks like any post-Hurricane Florida newsreel. Though despite this realism, there are some pieces of the environment that remind us that this is our world, but also different. It's a place where magic is real and recognized. Being reminded of this by a 15-story tall painted statues of people surrounded by vortexes of stigma was not on my South of Midnight bingo card, but it's a shock to a system that is effective in its reminder. I know these statues are supposed to represent the weird sideshow attractions that can be found off interstate highways in forgotten pockets of the country, but they are still so unbelievably weird. But not all is destroyed and gross, as we come across Hazel's childhood best friend, her stitched-together cuddlebug, Crouton. Crouton, with his patchwork body and odd but endearing presence, is more than just a doll. He's a literal quilt of memory, a symbol of Hazel's love for her mother, stitched with care and held onto through fear. This link to community and love is why I believe that Crouton was designed with the Guy Ben's quilting style in mind. He's also so adorable when he comes to life. Oh yeah, Hazel's magic allows for Crouton to come alive, and his first act of life is giving Hazel a hug when she probably needed it most. The moment leading up to this reveal, we can see the confidence returning to Hazel's eyes as she looks at Crouton and she tells him, "You're all I have left of my mama, until I find her," which I will. And the subtitle says she gives a determined laugh before hugging Crouton and bringing him to life. This instant shows that Hazel's magic is deeply tied to her emotions. She needed a reassuring hug, and her magic provided it. This moment is also why I believe that the catfish was once a companion of a weaver, possibly even Mahalia's, though his design seems even older than her ghost. Crouton serves as more than just an emotional companion for Hazel during this part of her journey. He is also a game mechanic that allows for more exploration of each level, his tiny body allowing for him to crawl into burrower dens and be launched by Hazel to unreachable ledges. This is normally to find hidden floofs and unravel small knots of stigma. He also provides a new skill in battle. When launched at an enemy, he will puppeteer the monster for a short time, attacking enemies and drawing fire away from Hazel. Damage done to the monster he controls will end the effect early, so he works best when controlling a ranged Haint, as they stay out of Hazel's way and do massive damage on impact. Now let's look at burrowers in Folklore. Burrowers in Folklore are nondescript creatures of mischief, and the way the game treats them reminds me of the European brownie, but outside. They're driven back by iron nails, and they will steal from you if you don't leave an offering. I like that Crouton's emotional support works both for Hazel and for the player. I know seeing Crouton run around always made me giggle with cuteness oxytocin, and that level of levity really helps balance out the emotional, impactful moments so we aren't crying from one end of the chapter to the next. And now, back to the story. It's at the feet of one of those monolith statues that Hazel clears out the first bit of Tom's stigma, and we find out that this might be less a story of how a gator became a monster and more about toxic family dynamics. In the weave, after clearing out the stigma, we see a vision of Preacher Jolene as a teenager/young adult, and her dad, Old Farmer Swap, and his pet gator, the titular two-toed Tom. Catfish's narration tells us that Old Farmer Swap's favorite method of control over his kids and animals was to starve them. We also learn through visual storytelling that Jolene was making her way to be a singer, a lit-up marquee reading "Live Music Tonight, Jolene," and in the vision, she is holding an acoustic guitar. We will see present-day Jolene in a few minutes, and it's very obvious from her name and design that she is based off our Lord and Savior, Dolly Parton. It's an incredibly fun addition to the story that tells us everything we need to know about Preacher Jolene, and we can confirm these preconceptions of her when we meet Jolene at her church. She is sweet, gentle, and wise beyond her appearance might try to tell you. Big hair that doubles the width of her face, with an equally big cowboy hat and matching outfit, all in preacher black. I believe she's Lacey's best friend. It's not stated as much in the game, but the interaction between Hazel and Jolene distinctly reminds me of a niece and an aunt born from found family lines instead of blood. And Jolene knows stuff about Lacey that Lacey hasn't told Hazel. And Jolene is loyal enough to Lacey that she won't tell Hazel what she knows. There's a small piece of dialogue here that, for me, clenches the magical realism of this game. I know I've given plenty of evidence already, but this is the first time the text explicitly confirms that the magical is recognized as a part of the everyday world. Jolene warns Hazel about Two-Toed Tom and says, completely casually, "He was my daddy's old pet." That offhanded delivery, from a preacher no less, tells us that Tom isn't some mysterious legend. He's a known figure, part of the town's living history. The oddity isn't that magic exists, it's that Hazel doesn't know about it. And that, more than anything, marks this as magical realism. The magic isn't hidden or secret, it's simply there, woven into folklore, family stories, and the world as people live it. A note from Mrs. Pearl also solidifies the genre, as she's talking about putting iron nails in her garden to keep burrowers out, and Hazel comments on this note with surprise. That's why she insists on real iron in her garden beds. Jolene tries to stop Hazel, but Hazel insists on finding her mom and runs back out of the church, heading towards the next vortex of stigma. After clearing it, we see a vision of Jolene after she had moved out of her family home, and the catfish tells us how her dad would come around with Tom to try and scare her back to him. To this end, Old Swap had Pavlov Tom to only eat after a bell had been rang, and he would use this along with starving Tom until he was ravenous, so when Swap rang the bell, Tom would go crazy. Now we understand why Tom has such mixed feelings about that church bell being rang. We can go into Jolene's house after clearing out the stigma, and there are a few things of note. First is the notes. We can find 2 notes from Jolene that foreshadow different parts of the narrative, one focused on this current chapter of the anthology, which I'll get into in a moment, and the other hinting at the overarching plot of the game. What's a little ironic is that there's a spider embroidery hanging above the note that's tied to this chapter story, but the spider actually connects to the other note. More on that later. Some other things we can see is a family portrait with Jolene's dad's face ripped out, and we can find framed posters of Jolene, which if you look up old concert posters of Dolly Parton, you will see plenty of similarities between the ones in game and hers, which is such a fun little detail. One of the portraits is also gradiated with a rainbow, which I think the developers put in here to say that Jolene is a supporter of the queer community, so we don't feel mildly isolated by her character arc involving the church. Now let's talk about the letter we find involving this chapter of the anthology. Jolene is writing about how she still gets a sense of guilt about what she did in her past, but says that she has done enough good after the fact that she knows she shouldn't feel guilty about it. What did she do? Well, it's kind of badass in my opinion, and it's covered in one of the coming visions we get, so let's get back to the story. Along the way to the next vortex, we pass a giant, decapitated pig statue wearing a chef's outfit. We see that Beau is safe, sleeping off a hangover on a bench with his dogs watching over him. Another surrealist giant statue, this one of a head carved out of a plant with silly string-like vine arms holding a crown and scepter, pulling together his namesake as Monarch Cotton. We also pass a missing child's poster, another bit of foreshadowing to the overarching plot of the game. There's some subtle, maybe even accidental meta-commentary happening in this level, if you can look past the shit-spewing sprinklers. Hazel first passes through a family-owned pig farm, a classic red barn, pigs still alive and wandering, clearly cared for before the family fled to Jolene's church. But moments later, she's slogging through a factory farm, where the pigs have all drowned. Their bloated bodies and waste clog every path. We even find a note revealing these deaths were expected. The owners didn't bother evacuating them because it was cheaper to replace them than to move them. It's a very brief detour in the narrative, but a devastating one. And it's clearly intentional. This section is viscerally unpleasant to get through. The game makes you feel the cost of that kind of systemic cruelty. When you place this beside the abuse Jolene and Tom experience, it reinforces a subtle but powerful message. There's a difference between animals raised with care and those raised strictly for profit, and ethically, we should know how the animals we eat are treated. As we come up on the next vortex, we can begin to hear the lyrics of Tom's song, and where Benji's song was telling of the guilt Rhubarb felt, this song hints at why Tom is the way he is, and the guilt that Jolene feels for what she's done, and how Tom is a reminder every time the rivers rise. Before we move on to the next vision, I want to bring up one of my few critiques of the game. In some levels, you can unravel the story's emotional knots out of order. And while nonlinear storytelling can be powerful, it only works when the entire narrative supports it, intentionally. Here, it feels accidental. The ancestral strands are supposed to guide you through the intended order of visions, but if you wander off the path, maybe searching for floofs or just exploring, it's easy to stumble into the final knot before seeing the middle ones. That's exactly what happened to me. I found the fourth vision, Jolene at her father's grave, before the third, and suddenly I was piecing together emotional context that should have unfolded more organically. Ideally, the devs could patch this by making the visions appear in a fixed sequence, no matter the order you find them. But I understand that might be impossible. The visions are tied to specific locations, and sometimes that place is the point, like the second vision, which happens right outside of Jolene's house. So maybe this isn't a bug, just a rough edge in an otherwise polished narrative. I could put two and two together and make out what was missed in the third knot, but it was still a bit disorienting, especially when the story has been so linear up until now. So what did I miss in the third vision? The one I saw after the payoff? Well, in the third vision, we see Jolene sneak up on her father and Tom while her dad napped under a tree. Before he wakes up, she grabs Tom's dinner bell and begins to ring it. And the only thing in Tom's line of sight is Old Swap, who had been eating the portions of food he's been withholding from his kids and Tom their entire lives. And while Tom's stomach was empty, his head was full of revenge, and Old Swap didn't last very long. This is very much a good for her meme moment, in my opinion anyways, for both Tom and Jolene, of course. After collecting the fourth vision, in whatever order you get them in, we are greeted with the Weave world again, and we have to run away from the growing shadows once more. Before we get to Tom's boss fight, let me quickly clear something up. Benji didn't actually have a traditional boss fight. For Benji, the boss challenge was a super vertical platforming section of climbing up Benji's tree. Technically, Benji has a health bar, but is tied to a single static target, the knot at the base of his neck. Once you climb the tree, the moment's over. No real combat, just emotional payoff. But Two-Toe Tom, on the other hand, he has a boss fight. But first we need to reweave his old emotional wound, which we can find at the end of the pig factory, tying together the themes of animal cruelty for profit that we get from Tom's story and the visual storytelling of the level. And the game ties these themes to the idea of hurt people hurt people. Hazel quotes her mom saying, "Lots of bad folks were mistreated when they were little." And this helps tie Tom's story to the overarching theme of redemption and forgiveness. In the final vision of Tom, we see how and why he became so massive as he is. Having been starved for so long, he never trusted that he was promised another meal. So he ate, and when he was full, he ate some more, just in case. We can see a similar case to Tom's in one of my favorite books of all time, Ninth House, a dark academy of fantasy about trauma and secret societies. I have a video covering the first few chapters of the book if you're interested. In Ninth House, Alex Stern has had a similar life to Tom's in that for years she never knew what it meant to be full. So when she was invited to Yale and she could eat as much as she wanted from the dining halls, she describes how she would have double the portions at each meal and would take extra sandwiches, cookies, and snack bars to eat throughout the day. She describes the hunger as a type of fear, an insecurity of survival she was so used to haunting her physical body. In the second book, we can see how this exposure therapy has allowed Alex to relax this mannerism, her stomach no longer growling at the strike of every hour. And for the boss battle, we kind of do the same thing for Tom. At least, we give him exposure therapy to relax his anxiety around church bells. But before I talk about the battle mechanics, I want to talk about the last bit of plot that leads up to the battle. Hazel finds her house at the bend of the river, but the thing is, so is Tom. Hazel races forward, a desperate dash to get to her house before Tom does. But again, Hazel isn't fast enough, and Tom eats the trailer in a single bite. Hazel is reasonably upset with Tom and goes after him in anger, and the boss battle begins. The boss battle is broken up into 3 phases that build on top of each other. The first phase sees us dodging melee bites from Tom, then dodging boulders he throws at us from a distance. This sequence exhausts Tom long enough for us to ring the church bell he throws up, which knocks him on his side, stunned. This allows us to attack his weak spot, his tongue. To add to the drama of the moment, Tom's song begins to play in full once we get him into his second phase. The second phase doesn't seem any different in pattern besides the bell is a little further away to hit and Tom hits a bit harder. The third phase makes Hazel have to throw a rock at the bell, and Tom has a new attack during his melee phase. After Hazel finishes phase 3, Tom, in an unfair move, grabs Hazel in a cutscene and swallows her whole. Hazel's fine though, and so is the pig Tom ate earlier. We wake up inside Tom's stomach, Pinocchio style like we're in Monstro, or inside Lord Jabba Jabu for the Zelda fans out there. As Hazel makes her way deeper into Tom's gut, the organ music from earlier swells again. Fitting, since we're now literally surrounded by organs. It's ridiculous. The levity of the music, the bright colors, the platforming across digestive fluids, it all leans hard into absurdity. And yet, it works. In his stomach, we get a second rendition of Tom's song, one we first heard a snippet back in Chapter 5. And when Hazel finally reaches the heart of the matter and reweaves Tom's pain, he throws everything up. The pig, the house, Hazel herself, all miraculously intact. Somehow. I don't know if this moment is meant to be absurd, cathartic, or both. You can even find a last will and testament in Tom's stomach, written by someone he'd eaten. A man with daughters he loved, and who he wanted to say goodbye to. On his own, that would be tragic, but in this setting, inside a vomiting alligator, it's hard to know what to feel, so I'm leaving that one up to you guys. What I can say is this. When Hazel emerges, Tom is changed. He leaves her, and the pig, alone. No longer driven by hunger, no longer a danger. The reweaving worked. With Tom's anger quelled, Hazel turns her attention to her house. As a player, we immediately notice it's being held together by red thread, webbed like spider silk, stitching the broken pieces of the trailer back into place. Hazel doesn't mention it at first, not until she finds a picture of her and her mom, the same one she looked at during the game's opening, from the day they went to the county fair. Hearing Lacey's reflection on that day from her own perspective is powerful. It highlights the difference between a child's memory and a parent's, the contrast in what they notice, what they carry, and what they wish they could hold on to. But the emotion? The takeaway is the same: love, tenderness, and longing for more time. Lacey ends her echo with the same sentiment Hazel shared earlier, wishing they had more carefree moments together. But this time, Hazel amends her wish. She looks at the vision of her mom and simply says, "I wish you were here." And that's the heart of Hazel's grief. She doesn't need her mom to be perfect or present at every game or giggle. She wants her there, alive, in her life, period, and a statement. This girl has known enough loss in her life. This journey, the reweaving of others, has also been unraveling her. Fighting for Benji, helping Tom, healing old wounds. Hazel's been unknowingly working out the knots in her own heart. And while she's not done, her emotional bottle is only half full, this moment gives her, and us, a new lens in which to see everything that came before, just like what we experienced at every level so far. I want to call this a palimpsest, even though I know that's not technically the word for it, but that layered, mirrored storytelling, the recursive grief, it deserves a word that feels that heavy, that intentional. Hazel finally breaks down crying, which she's held back from until now. Not when her house was ripped away, not after she saw Benji's suffering, not even after she was eaten by a giant fucking alligator. Until now, she stayed upright, funny, determined, even a little cocky. But here, she lets herself grieve. It reminds me of a runner after they cross the finish line, allowing themselves to feel exhaustion for the first time since they started. I don't want to assign a single meaning to those tears. They're not tidy. They're just real. A release. She's reached the goal she's been chasing since the start. She found her house. She crossed what she thought was the finish line. But her mother isn't there. There's no trace of her except for the red thread, and Hazel hasn't yet realized what that means. For the first time in the game, she doesn't know what to do next, and that's when the game quietly shows us what's next, even if Hazel doesn't yet see it. As she sits by the river to mourn, the camera pans, revealing distant hills and beyond them, a steep mountaintop, rising alone above the horizon. In a moment of levity, the catfish appears, scaring the pig that was trying to comfort Hazel, and he congratulates Hazel on her fight with Tom. But Hazel is obviously not in the mood to celebrate. But the catfish catches something important as Hazel tells him what she found in the house: the red string, or red yarn as the story of Hug and Molly goes. This is a story that Hazel has actually heard before, and it echoes tales every hard-headed child around the world has been told at some point. Be good, or a monster might find you misbehaving and take you away. Whether it's the Fae and Changelings or the Boogeyman, the warning is always the same. In South of Midnight, this is the game's version of Hug and Molly. Hazel even quotes her grandmother: "Don't walk the streets alone at night, or Hug and Molly will hold you tight. Leaving behind only red yarn." The first part of the rhyme holds true to the actual legend from Abbeville, Alabama. The real Hug and Molly is said to hug children who are out too late and scream in their ears. Not even a blood-curdling scream, more like a brown note situation. She's not out here to hurt them, just to scare the shit out of them. Literally. But that's it. No red string. No kidnapping. No magical webs. So what's with the red yarn here? This is a clear example of the game remixing folklore for the sake of its own story. And it works. The red yarn calls on two things: Hazel's weaving magic, and possibly East Asian beliefs that associate red thread with fate and destined connections. These associations reshape Molly into something more than a boogeyman. She's tied, literally and thematically, to Hazel's journey. Her red yarn can mark her as an inverse of Hazel. Hazel's strands are white and blue. Or maybe something more complicated. We'll find out soon enough, but what's already clear is that Hazel and Molly are fated to meet. It's also possible that the spiritual webs containing Lacey's house items are Molly's doing. A haunting breadcrumb trail spun just for Hazel. But why has she been doing so? Well, the game leaves you guessing until the final moments. But we are pages and pages away from talking about that. So let's see what Hazel does next, as the catfish seems to have an idea of where she can start looking for clues. And as we move on to chapter 6, Hush Hush Sweet Cherie, the catfish actually tells us preemptively where we are going. To one of Bunny Flood's homes, her weekend getaway home, as Hazel's dad was once kidnapped by Hug and Molly, and Bunny was able to get him back somehow. Ugh. Reading the chapter name again makes my heart sink, but I'm also thinking about how the Annabelle doll will be only a few cities away from me, out of her box and on the loose, and that seriously freaks me out. R.I.P. San Antonio. But back to the game. Before we dive in, I need to give a serious heads up. This chapter is devastating, and that's coming from someone who already let you raw dog Benji's story without warning. So, here it is now. Content warning. This chapter includes abuse against children and the death of a baby. Please take care of yourselves out there. The catfish drops Hazel off, and we can see the vortex of stigma in the distance, a beacon of pain drawing us like a lighthouse. And Hazel can feel it, her settling into her role as a weaver. This is the smallest level in the game. With all of the stigma surrounding Bunny's house, we don't have to explore very far until the very end. This house exists on the edge of the forest and the river, a liminal space if I've ever seen one. Liminal spaces act as thresholds, places where the boundaries between the past and the present, the real and the surreal, start to blur. And Bunny's house, sitting in this twilight zone of life and death, is exactly that. It's a place suspended in grief, in memory, and the pain that hasn't moved on. Hazel is walking into a real haunted house, not one filled with ghosts, but one whose story has been stagnated by denial and greed. The walls here almost bleed with the trauma they have experienced. And before we get into the house, we find another fragment of Lacey's memories. But this one doesn't have anything to do with Hazel.
I guess no one's here.
Hazel.
Granny Couture. Oh, Bunny. Can't remember when I stopped dreaming about Dad. Restorative, element, grand, tapestry? Always so put together. Guess it helps her keep going. Wow, I wouldn't even recognize her. She looks so in love. What kind of person needs a room like this? That's a chunk of Benji. All this research on the walls, too. She was serious. What is Bunny up to? That's a big-ass feather. What the hell? Why's Laurent in those pictures? Those poor missing kids. Could have been Molly's doing. Hang on, Dad? You went missing too? Red yarn. She found out Hugging Molly's not just a scary story for kids. Hey, that's my distaff. Patterns too. Where'd she get all this?
Hazel, but rather her father, Trey. The object is a bracelet tucked inside a jewelry box. Lacey talks about how Bunny never approved of her, believing that she was only after the flood money. But Lacey's confession confirms that that was never what she was after. She calls Bunny's wedding ring gaudy. Instead, she lingers fondly over the bracelet that she and Trey chose together, and the vision ends. What Hazel gets out of this vision is a piece of information she never got from her mother. Lacey doesn't like to talk about Trey, and the grief we hear in Lacey's voice when she says his name in the vision tells us all we need to know about why she doesn't talk about him. It's too painful for her. But we also get the sense of how this affects Hazel. She doesn't even know the story of her mother's engagement band. What we, the players, get out of this vision is a foreshadowing to what the next bit of stigma is going to have in store for us. After a short platforming section and a few battles, Hazel makes it to the house. And did I say this place was a haunted house? Because it certainly looks the part. Hazel even comments about how the place gives her the creeps. And it should. The things that have happened here are genuinely terrifying. The first vision we see is of Bunny as a young mother with her 2 children. Trey, Hazel's father, as a 6-year-old, and a tumbling toddler of a little girl named Cherie. The catfish's narration tells us how Cherie was Bunny's favorite kid. She saw Cherie as the force of nature that would surpass her someday. Cherie was Bunny's chosen legacy. In the vision, we see Cherie about to fall off a toy house. Bunny wakes up from her nap in time to catch her. Then Bunny yells at Trey for not taking better care of Cherie. After the vision, we find out from Hazel that she never knew her dad had a sister, which is never really a good sign. Moving around the house, we make our way to the next vision. In this one, we learn that Trey knew that Bunny didn't love him as much as she loved Cherie. And we see Bunny berate and punish him for Cherie's dress getting muddy. This detail, in the catfish's words, before the accident, are incredibly important as we move on to the next vision, which is found by the dock on the river. My hands are shaking. Oh my god, I hate this part. I'm going to quote the catfish's narration because I think his delivery is absolutely perfect for this moment. When his sister got her dress dirty again, Trey tried to rinse her off in the water. I don't believe Hazel's dad meant to do it. He just didn't count on how slippered she'd be. Bunny never forgave him. Trey lost his sister and his mama that day. The animation in Bunny's scream, coupled with the catfish's earnest and soft narration, it hurts so badly. There are only 3 visions in this level, but the message they convey is one of the most heartbreaking. I think the short and sweet approach was the right move. It's an emotional climax at the midway point of the game, and it sets us up for what's about to unfold in the story to come. Hazel also gives us a line that humanizes Bunny in this moment. Bunny had to bury every child she brought into this world. That has to take a toll. The fact the game gives us this moment to see Bunny is amazing. It really makes us question if Bunny was wrong for everything she did after Cherie's death. And she's gonna need that grace after we get a peek inside her house and find all the skeletons that were stashed away in there. Metaphorical skeletons, mind you, but the actual thing she has might be worse. Harkening back to Benji's level, right before we reweave him, Hazel comes upon the wound she must mend. She describes the wound like someone had carved out his heart. And upstairs, in the attic, we can find Benji's heart. Notes and depictions of the ritual Bunny used, foreshadowing what we will find at the top of the cliff overlooking the house. Unable to accept the death of her daughter, Bunny sought out the magic that gave Benji new life. And when she found out she couldn't replicate the magic, she stole it. Throughout the house, we are told through visual storytelling how much Bunny loved Cherie, reinforcing our sympathy for the woman before we can find her crimes. The many portraits of Bunny and Cherie, the almost angelic painting of Cherie in her bedroom, and the bedroom left untouched by time itself. Trey's room, on the other hand, is covered in cobwebs, the wallpaper peeling. Even with both of them dead, Bunny still has her favorite kid. Ambiguity and subtlety are the bread and butter of the storytelling for this half of the game. The game makes a point to keep every person and creature Hazel will confront from now on in a suspended state of innocence and guilt. Bunny, hugging Molly, the Rougarou, who I will talk about in a moment. The game gives us strong evidence that these people are evil, selfish beings, but also either incredibly kind or incredibly sympathetic. As far as we currently know, Hugging Molly kidnaps children, but we are also told the caveat that she only kidnaps those who are unwanted. But she also has Lacey, and we don't know why. And Bunny is wicked. We felt this from the start, but her motives are sympathetic, making her complex and relatable. In the room with Benji's heart, we find more missing children's posters, including Trey's, which gives us a number of Molly's victims and their faces. But if we are paying attention to Trey's room, we see his toy has been sewn back together with red yarn. That detail shifts something. It suggests that Trey wasn't just taken, he was kept, cared for in some strange way. Not just a missing child, but a part of something bigger. And then we climb the cliff overlooking the house, and we see how far Bunny's ambitions and denial will take her. We don't know who to trust or who is our enemy. But first, Hazel is confronted by Bunny in her secret room. Bunny works out that Hazel is a weaver, and Hazel asks if Bunny is a weaver too. But Bunny dodges the question. But for me, Bunny marks herself as a villain with a throwaway line here. My pig factory is no place for a girl to be cavorting. I believe we verified this in the factory itself. I think the missive telling the workers to let the pigs drown was signed by Bunny, but that can be missed. Here, she basically declares herself the murderer of the pigs, and she also tells us that she's been keeping an eye on Hazel since she left her mansion. Sure, Hazel is covered in pig shit and swamp mud, but that doesn't automatically mean that she was at Bunny's pig factory. It's all very suspicious. And then Bunny dresses Hazel up in a very Victorian, but I'll admit practical outfit. This feels significant. Hazel's white grandmother choosing her clothing like she's a doll or an action figure reeks of whitewashing and cultural erasure. This is a moment loaded with aesthetic manipulation. Bunny is taking control of Hazel's identity. That said, I want to be honest. The full implications of this action, especially as a white storyteller analyzing a black protagonist, is likely beyond the scope of what I can meaningfully unpack here. But I see it, and I think it matters. I would love to see a video explaining the cultural significance of this moment from the perspective of lived experience. If someone is willing to do so, or already has, let me know. I remember not trusting Bunny my first time around, but I could see how it's easy for Hazel and other players to give her a little slack. The woman has known a great amount of loss. Her actions have been terrible, and that can't be easily forgiven, but her motivations are deeply human. She is a mother grieving who chose denial instead of acceptance. And that sentiment is reflected in the song's verse. See, nothing's ever truly lost. I'm not going to try to sing that part because it's too sad. Hazel climbs the cliffside, and the song is playing. And right between the lyrics, we hear a baby crying in the distance. The sound gets louder as we get closer to the cherry tree on the cliffside. And now we can also see the stigma vortex surrounding the area. It might just be me, but I think the vortex looks more corrupt than what we've seen so far. The angles seem off. When Hazel gets to the top of the cliffside, we see the knotted wound and the baby cries are coming from the tree's heart. Hazel uses the pattern she got from completing the bottle, and we find out we aren't healing Bunny's old wounds, nor Hazel's father's, though that's what the visions might have led us to believe. They were Cherie's moments, her wounds, leading us to her conclusion. A life snuffed out too soon, and a soul forced into a tree to preserve it. In this final vision, we see Bunny putting Cherie into the center of the tree, and the catfish explains how Bunny stole Benji's magic to trap Cherie's spirit, to keep her close, instead of letting her move on to the next world. Hazel sympathizes with Bunny, seeing her actions for the desperate attempt they were. But it wasn't just desperation, it was denial and grief and entitlement that blossomed into delusion and greed. This is what I mean when I say that this isn't a lovely or beautiful moment. Though the imagery of the tree coming back to life with Hazel's reweaving is probably one of the most gorgeous sequences of the game. This revelation is deeply sad, punctuated by the final note of the song ending with the somber "lost." Hazel wishes Cherie a restful sleep, and the scene moves on to the next chapter, with the catfish trying to reinforce the idea that Hazel is wrong for feeling sorry for Bunny. Because while what Bunny did was rooted in love, it is also unforgivable and selfish. Before we move on to the next chapter, I want to talk about a note that we find in Bunny's house that foreshadows the next creature we will be seeing, the Rougarou. This is less of a subtle foreshadow and more directly telling us who our next creature is. And what's fun about this note is that it describes a bit of what the real-world Rougarou legend entails, along with connecting it to a song by Willie DeVille, before informing the player how this game is remixing the folklore. So let's dive into that and what it means for the game for just a second. The Rougarou comes from the French word loup-garou, which means werewolf, but unlike European werewolves, this Cajun transformation is not tied with lunar cycles. Instead, the legend of the Rougarou is a cautionary tale, especially as it transformed in the heartlands of the Louisiana Bayou. Beware the Rougarou who hunts at night, cursed for 101 days to be not man, but beast, unless they catch you alone in the dark, and transfer the curse by drawing your blood. Beware of breaking Lent, doing so too often can risk you transforming into the Rougarou. It's such a fantastic choice to run this creature's story alongside Hug and Molly's. Both are boogeyman figures, both used to scare people into obedience, but they aren't necessarily deadly. Molly is given sympathy in her stories, said to be a grieving mother looking for her lost kid. The Rougarou is cursed and wants to be free, not bloodthirsty. This ties back wonderfully to the subtlety the game is trying to pull here, making you question how much you can trust these characters even before we meet them. Now let's talk about how the game remixes this folklore. South of Midnight's Rougarou, according to the letter, are said to dance with the spirits of the Bayou Bal Gullah, which is the connection to the Willie DeVille song Loup-Garou Bal Gullah. This connection transforms the Rougarou from solitary, cursed individual into a reveler of the night, a part of the folkloric tapestry that weaves itself deep in the bayou's channels. This connection also helps set up the full remix of the legend, where, instead of being cursed as punishment for breaking social norms, the Rougarou is a metamorphosis caused by intense trauma. This mirrors how the game handles all of its legends, not as villains or monsters, but as survivors of trauma, suspended by magic, grief, and memory. But who is this mysterious Rougarou? The game isn't quite so subtle about that, as we find the letter of the Rougarou around the same time that we find the pictures of Laurent Baptiste. And as Hazel makes her way to Laurent, Hazel's ancestral whispers begin to hiss Rougarou instead of her name. It's a bit on the nose, but I believe that it's a bait-and-switch tactic. Make the players believe they know the answer, but it's actually just another question. What kind of trauma did Laurent experience to transform him into the Rougarou? And what has he done with that power since? And the whispered hisses feel like a warning. This is not a creature Hazel's magic can reweave. The whispered Rougarou, both during travel and as part of the level song, are fun call-tos to DeVille's song, as the background singers hum Rougarou, Bagula throughout. And speaking of thematic callbacks and clever Easter eggs, Laurent's name might be a subtle nod to Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. These books take place primarily in New Orleans, and the folklore remix here, recasting the Rougarou as an immortal shaped by trauma, echoes many of the same themes in Anne Rice's novels. Hazel has clear animosity towards Laurent, saying to herself at the start of the chapter, "Better get to the juke joint fast so I can get back to forgetting that Laurent exists." It's interesting that Hazel is so protective of her mother. Lacey bottles up her exhaustion, her fears, her grief. She doesn't talk about Hazel's father, doesn't explain her relationship with Bunny, doesn't speak about Bunny's influence or trauma. She just works, quietly, to hold everything together. But Hazel feels the weight Lacey carries, even if it's unspoken. And to avoid making it worse, Hazel minimizes her own struggles. She cracks jokes, lashes out in bursts, bottles everything up, because she doesn't want to be another weight on her mother's shoulders. That's why we saw that explosion of angst and resentment at the beginning of the game. Bottled up emotions eventually corrupt or explode. See what I did there? But that's the whole ironic metaphor of the game, isn't it? Hazel bottles up gnarled emotions until the bottle's full to burst, before dispersing it somewhere it can be free without pain. This juxtaposition of an ironic motif after showing the real-world consequences of bottling emotions makes the whole process more interesting to look at. But the cycle between Lacey and Hazel of protection through withholding themselves has caused more harm than good. They both desperately love each other. We see how they celebrate each other's accomplishments and good moods. So I wonder if it's an underestimation, not believing the other has the emotional bandwidth to share their struggles, that causes them to not trust the other to be there for them during the rough times. But either way, the cycle needs to be broken before the pain between them can begin to heal, and Hazel still needs to find her mom first. But first, let's talk about level design, as it's very interesting here. The setting itself is very familiar. We are back in the forest. Morning mist even thicker than before as Hazel navigates crevices between hills. The platforming also gets a new challenge, and these sections remind me of Leapfrog, but significantly easier. Hazel has to time her jumps across different logs in order to get across different sections of the river. I wish there were spaces where you have to backpedal or risk failing, but unfortunately that doesn't happen. However, during the Temple Run section of this level, these leapfrog parts are very stressful in a good way. But what really makes this level interesting is what Hazel says as she sees the old mill off in the distance. Lumber used to be a huge industry around here. I wonder what happened. We've seen the abandoned homes of the shantytown, the eviction notices, the horrible reality of gentrification. This level helps to elevate that theme. We see the size of the lumber industry that once was here, and we find notes that tell us the owners abused their workers for profit. Even after faulty equipment killed a few workers, they laid off a few senior workers to cut back on payroll costs. The best part about wandering this level is finding notes on Laurent's life. And boy, did he have a long life. The first note we find on him is from June 13th, 1922. How a parchment note survived 100 years out in this damp, mist-filled southern forest, we have to suspend our disbelief to understand. But they're fun as fuck to read, so I don't care. We walk by giant peaches and 10-story human monoliths. This is clearly something we need to just go along with as well. The note is from the perspective of a bootlegger boss who found Laurent as a small boy covered in blood. Laurent won't say what happened to him, at least not yet, but the boss, how I will refer to him from here on out, knows his parents are both dead. The boss assesses that Laurent is stronger than he looks and will make for a good lookout from the fuzz. This is how we know the writer of the notes is a bootlegger. If the players haven't made the connection that Laurent is some sort of creature, this is where they will begin to question it, because not even Hazel sounds convinced when she says, "He has to be like a junior or something." And if the players haven't gotten it yet, then not the next letter, as that one just solidifies that the boss is a bootlegger with Laurent crashing a boat full of liquor, but the letter after that will send the foreshadowing home. The boss describes the morning he promoted Laurent to a lieutenant. Laurent had too much to drink and began talking about his parents. Another bootlegger named Matheson teases him for crying. Laurent backhands him so hard he flies across the room and breaks his legs. This display of superhuman strength should be enough to convince all players that Laurent is not a normal human. We also find another item containing Lacey's confessions, a framed picture of her and Laurent. There's no bitterness or resentment in Lacey's confession, just sadness. A wish that Laurent had felt more safe around her and Hazel, as he seemed to be so afraid of everything, even himself. But Hazel is still holding a grudge, saying he didn't deserve Lacey or Hazel's love. We quickly find another letter, dated a week after the last one. Laurent had run off and vanished into the Prospero woods for almost a week. When the boss found him, he was naked and bloody in the woods. He doesn't blame Laurent for lashing out, but tells him he needs to keep his emotions in check. Not the best advice. He needs therapy more than anything, but that wasn't really a thing in the 1920s. But his lack of therapy currently is a bit of a red flag, sorry Laurent. Another letter from the boss confirms that Laurent does not age like normal people, if at all. 10 years have gone by since he found Laurent, and though he's grown taller and stronger, he still has an early 20-year-old baby face. After Prohibition ended, the boss moved west to find his fortune there, but Laurent stayed. And I wonder if this was on purpose with the 21st Amendment that Hazel brings up, but 21 years later, Laurent is still in Prospero, still young and spry, having bought the juke joint. The boss doesn't question why Laurent is still young when he should be approaching middle age. He just suspects that Laurent is going to be in Prospero for a while yet. There's something about Laurent's stationary life that feels familiar, and it's the idea that spirits and ghosts are trapped and are unable to leave or move on to the next life due to regrets and unfinished business. Laurent has been in the same spot, haunting his own joint for over 100 years, and making the connection to the Rougarou in the Gullah helps exemplify the idea that the Rougarou's existence being similar to that of a mournful ghost. Hazel makes it to the juke joint, and I forget if I had this reaction the first time I saw this cutscene, but when Laurent's mouth opens as he realizes how much older Hazel is since the last time he saw her, it made my breath catch. He's an immortal who's seen his childhood friends grow old and die around him, but seeing Lacey's daughter all grown up, I think this might be the first time he's noticed the curse of his longevity in a very long while. Time has slipped away from him, more time than he thought. More time than he might have planned. How devastating. But Hazel has no sympathy. She flippantly agrees that it's been a while before asking about Hug and Molly. Laurent pretends not to know what she's talking about. She brings up Bunny. He scoffs and jokes about her Victorian outfit. He tries to remind Hazel that Bunny's been absent her whole life. But Hazel doesn't let that slide. She calls him a hypocrite. He walked out too. This part is a bit brutal. Above the bar hangs a photo of the three of them, Lacey, Laurent, and Hazel, all mid-laugh. He looks at it, then turns back to Hazel and says, "This is between me and your mama." Which he's not wrong, but Hazel obviously feels abandoned as well, and she's entitled to some closure herself. But poking a Rougarou with their own regrets is not a good idea, as Laurent transforms after just a few verbal lashings from Hazel. He flies away without hurting her, demonstrating his restraint, and Hazel jumps into Weaver mode. She calculates in a moment that Laurent is something born of pain, and her powers might be able to soothe the beast inside him, and she jumps into action chasing after him. Later, after the reweaving, we learn that Laurent is still cursed. the reweaving only giving him control for now. I think this symbolizes two things: that damage done by childhood trauma, repressed for decades, will take more than a single breakthrough to fix. It will take years of Laurent actively working on being vulnerable to mend these wounds, if it's even fully possible. And while Hazel steps into her weaver role here, it may seem like she's putting her own need for closure aside to help someone else. But the game doesn't leave her completely empty-handed. In the loft above the bar, she finds the same photo she found for Lacey's memories, but next to it is a letter, Laurent's unsent confession. The words he's been too afraid to say for years. This is Hazel's moment of closure. Not from his mouth, but from his heart. It's proof that he loved them, and that he left not out of malice, but because he didn't trust himself to stay. In the next section of the level, Hazel travels through company housing from the lumber industry, and we learn it was one of those places where instead of paying their workers cash, they paid the workers with scrib, a currency that could only be spent at the company store. This will lend itself to Laurent's childhood story and what happened to him to turn him into a Rougarou. But first, a quick history detour, since we never really see this part of American history in media. I know the first time I came across it was when I was in my early 20s and was reading The Diviners by Brer. And this game is only the second time I've ever seen a labor town. These capitalist hellholes were used mostly between the 1850s and the 1940s, during what would be called America's Gilded Era. And like I mentioned earlier, they were used by large industries, like lumber, coal, and railroading, to house and control their workforce. Since the company store, housing, and utility were all owned by the person who owned the factory, all money would eventually circulate back to the boss. It was a horrible practice of exploitation that mostly targeted the already disenfranchised, like Black Americans and immigrant workers. Now, the USA wasn't the only country to practice this type of duplicity. Several English-ruled countries also employed this tactic. Luckily, new protective labor laws and efficiency of travel eventually made labor towns impossible. Though, we may be seeing a reversal of this in the coming years, if the Orange POS and his goons have anything to say about it. Anyways, Laurent's mother was dying, slowly fading from existence. It's never stated exactly what was wrong with her, but it's probably cancer. It's always fucking cancer. We find letters, some from the company about not being able to turn store credit into cash to help pay for his mother's medical bills, and some from his mother and father. His mother's letters are those you would expect from a dying mother and wife. She knows her life is forfeit, so she worries about those who will outlive her. The letter from his dad explains why Laurent carries his pain so deeply inside. It's what his father did. It's what he did until he was shot dead. And the accompanying song in this level tells us how Laurent's father perpetuated this cycle of bottling up emotions, with him beating Laurent until he learned to steal his emotions behind cold stone. The visions from the stigma help us understand the rest of what happened to Laurent. His mom did pass from the sickness, and the catfish confirms that with the doctor, she might have lived. We also see Laurent's dad heavily drinking in the vision. Instead of fulfilling his wife's dying wish of teaching their son to love and grieve freely, he forces Laurent to bottle everything up until he explodes. Generational trauma at its finest, ladies and gents. The second vision shows us the sick irony of Laurent's abusive father. He beats Laurent to be a man, but most days he fails to provide even the basic needs for his son, Laurent having to fish for their dinner if he wanted to eat. I love Hazel's sympathy after this vision. Seeing the life Laurent lived, her own sorrow seems to heal. It's an understanding between them that she might empathize with directly, having felt her own sense of parental neglect. Then we see how Laurent learned to cope. In the next vision, we learn that Laurent went running into the woods crying, using branches to beat the air, and screaming at the animals who came to witness him. In the second to last vision, it sets us up for the climactic final vision, showing us Laurent and his dad, and his father's boss. His boss gets in a fancy car and nearly hits the two of them as he peels away from the mill. But before we dip into the final vision, Hazel is confronted by the catfish again. He's playful again, offering his assistance when Hazel tells him Laurent is a Rougarou, but not assistance to reweave Laurent, but to find another way to get to Molly. He understands the danger a Rougarou is, and when Hazel brings up Bunny, Catfish tries to warn Hazel again of who Bunny is. But Hazel has seen the Shree Tree and felt sympathy. She believes in Bunny's reasons. So when the Catfish says, "Reasons enough to send her granddaughter after danger, when her mother might not even be alive?" It doesn't just fall on deaf ears, but red hot ones. Hazel had just seen a mother's grave. She can't think about that possibility. The catfish sees her pain, apologizes, and wishes her safe travels. Hazel then traverses up the old sawmill, the heart of the lumber industry in Prospero, and the heart of Laurent's pain. At the very top, we find Laurent's knot, and we see the final vision. Laurent's emotions had bottled up to the point of explosion. At 8 years old, he confronted the company boss. His father tried to stop him, but seeing his son's pain, seeing how deeply it went, his own rage was set aflame. But before he could give that rich fucker the beatdown he deserved, the coward pulls a gun on Laurent's dad and shoots him dead. Laurent falls to his knees, looks to the sky, and screams. Screams until his pain bursts from his skin in the form of feathers. He transforms into the Rougarou for the first time and hunts down his father's boss as he drives away. We don't see the final moment, but it's heavily implied that justice, both violent and swift, was served. I'm sorry for my own rage. I have no sympathy for that thing disguised as a person. I won't lie, there is a catharsis in that. The man who destroyed Laurent's family doesn't get to walk away. I know Laurent never forgave himself for what happened. I know it's the moment that eventually drove him away from Lacey. But the pain that created the Rougarou was never his fault. That scream was inherited, and the fear the sawmill boss died with? Well, is saying good a bit too mean? This is my favorite song in the whole game. The pain, the grief, the rage. Joey Ritchie delivered the vocal performance of a lifetime for the song. It's tied for the song that makes me cry the most when I listen to it. The lyrics delve into the complexities of masculinity and emotional repression. Lines such as, "The man was the devil. He whipped me, he hurt me, all to make me a man. He laid the first brick, not me." Highlight the cyclical nature of abuse and the societal pressures to conform to a stoic ideal. This metaphor of building a wall, brick by tear-stained brick, encapsulates the internalization of pain and eventual breaking point leading to transformation. And the way they tie the song into the boss battle itself is simply fantastic. This is also one of the best boss fights in the game. It's the one that feels the most like a challenge, similar to something that you might find in a Dark Souls battle, needing to time your dodges and moving through different phases and movesets. It's a very choreographed battle, so once you understand the rhythm of each phase, it's only a matter of whittling down his HP and surviving his hurricane attack. Once the battle is over, like I said before, the reweaving doesn't work like it did for the others so far. Laurent is still cursed. But he has a moment of confession with Hazel. I don't necessarily like that he explains everything to her. I love the full context, his emotions displayed for the player to know and understand. How he felt like he was juggling glass having Lacey, who saw all of his pain and flaws and still loved him. How fragile and scared that made him feel, and thus why he ran away. But it kind of spits in the eye of the notion explored earlier of a child not taking on the burdens of the adults in her life. I will say, this does feel less like a take my burdens confession and more like a conversation between two people. As it stands, the moment works, and I don't know how this could have gone any better or differently without losing anything that we get from the moment. So, before we move on to the next chapter, I want to address something that might feel like a narrative shift. In the first two levels, the game presents itself as an anthology, isolated stories like Benji's and Tom's that seem loosely connected by theme and mood rather than plot. But with Bunny's Cottage and the Rougarou, the stories are now directly tied to Hazel and Lacey's past. It might seem like we've departed from the anthology structure in favor of pushing the main plot forward, but I'd argue we haven't. The stories of Cherie and Trey, of Laurent and his family, may feel more intertwined with Hazel's journey, but they still occur decades before she was born. Their tragedies are self-contained enough to function like standalone chapters. What we're seeing isn't a structural break, it's convergence. Think of the game's narrative as a spiral, with the overarching story of Hazel and Lacey as an arrow running through its center. Each chapter loops us closer to that center, and as we draw nearer to the climax, both physically, as we descend deeper into the forest, and narratively, it makes sense that these tales would become more directly linked to Hazel's own. Okay, but deep breath for this next level. Now let's move into Chapter 8. Their eyes were watching. In the transition, the catfish's narration confirms what we inferred earlier about Laurent's old wounds. They will take more than a single breakthrough to fade. It will take time to heal. This is so important to remember. This game is a love letter to those of us who have been through their own tragedies and haven't quite healed from the pain. And this clarification from the catfish is the creators addressing us, the broken, and reminding us that we need to be patient with ourselves in the process. It is working. Sorry, I had to mention that beautiful detail. It's great to let your audience internalize messages found in the context clues of the text itself, but this type of message is one that does a lot more work when used directly. So, another deep breath. Let's talk about level design. This level focuses a lot on platforming. As Hazel is moving up the mountain, the camera panned back to see during her emotional breakdown after finding her house and not her mom. This peak is called the Witch's Nose. We find that out when Hazel jokingly asks a pair of crows if they know the way. This is such a subtle moment of storytelling, because the crows show her the path ahead in the form of a wind tunnel that lets her soar from one ledge to the next. Now, let's break it down because my heart is fluttering thinking about it. A huge lesson Hazel needs to learn is to know when to ask for help and admit she can't do something alone, before she's falling apart. We've only seen her ask for help in moments of sheer desperation, but here with the crows, she asks casually. It was a joke. I'm sure Hazel didn't expect for it to work, but it did. The gift of asking for help, she's lifted into the air, becoming weightless for a few amazing seconds. She gets to live her dream of flying. This is another example of the game mechanic becoming metaphor, and it's so fucking cool. Hopping from ledge to ledge, Hazel finds some more notes, this time from a search and rescue squad member, last name Jackson. Jackson describes why they are up in the mountains. They are looking for a young boy who fell off a cliff. His parents were able to pinpoint where he landed, but when the squad got to the location, all they found was a shoe and red yarn. Hug and Molly got to him first. The second letter only confirms that Hug and Molly does have the boy, and that her lair is the Witch's Nose, two things we already kinda knew. But the third letter has something odd in it. One of the squad members had broken their leg, and that night, Molly snuck into the camp and wrapped the person's leg in her red yarn. She was so gentle, the squad member didn't even wake up during the wrapping, and come morning, they found that their leg was almost completely healed. This subtly tells the player the true nature of Molly, even if Hazel only focuses on the fact that she's getting closer to Molly's lair. Now the game creates the tightrope between believing Molly is innocent versus evil in light of this new information and what Laurent and the catfish say before the beginning of this chapter. Laurent could never make it to Molly's lair, insinuating that she might be too powerful for even the Rougarou to overcome. And the catfish reiterates this fact through Hazel's perspective, highlighting her fear that Molly might be too powerful for even her magic. But then we get another confessional item from Lacey at the final note, which makes everything even murkier. The confessional item is a children's book about band-aids, and Lacey begins the confession by saying, "I was bringing a first aid kit. Wish I didn't have to." She's talking about her job, when she gets called to a house to see how a child is doing when neglect and abuse have been reported. This is the sad reality of her work. Then she goes on to mention that Jolene might know someone who can help the kids, someone outside of the system. But who? And the final letter from Jackson says they found a note, one written in children's handwriting, saying that they are happy and don't want to go home. Jackson's gut instinct is to accept the child's wish, declaring that's what his heart is telling him is right, and they call off the search. Hazel can't believe what she's reading, thinking they doomed the child, and we, the players, are left with two thoughts. Is Hazel correct in her outrage? They left a child in the wilderness with a creature out of old stories. And we don't know what Molly can do. Maybe she bewitched the child into writing the note. But the stories specifically say that Molly only takes unwanted children. And if we think about this fact, it recontextualizes one of the sentences from Jackson's first letters. The parents apparently couldn't get to him. Did the child's parents push him off the cliff in the first place? This is all speculation, but that's the point. We are supposed to be weighing these options as we head up the mountain. While traveling and after Lacey's confessional, a song unlike any other in the soundtrack begins to play. It's titled "Life is a Fight to be Won," and it's essentially about Hazel's journey and the game's theme of the human experience. It's a somber song, but one that is also a call to arms in a way. Lines like, "Stories be telling what secrets they hide. For truth is not out there, truth is inside. We are all hurting under cruel sun. Sleep no more, dreamer, become maker, seeker." The lyrics speak to the broken, reminding us that our pain is not the end of the story, that sharing it, confronting it, shaping it into something new is the fight. And the song follows us to the end of the chapter. Another short transitional chapter, one that introduces us to the dichotomy around Hug and Molly, making us, the player, more skeptical of her villainy, even as Hazel is determined to confront her as one. The catfish's narration into the next chapter is interesting, as he gives us a name for this far-off place, the Haunted Harbor. No other level had been named by the catfish or Hazel, and I wonder why this place is different. I'll have to keep my eyes open. So, let's get into it. Chapter 9, A Webs and Women. Something to speculate as Hazel continues up the mountain is, why was her father taken by Hug and Molly? And why did Bunny get him back? Bunny told Hazel it was because Bunny was a weaver, and Molly wanted to get at Bunny for ruining her work. But again, we need to think of the explicit story we heard from the catfish and Hazel. Molly only takes the unwanted. And what we know from the visions in Bunny's cottage is that Trey was unwanted and unloved by Bunny. So then was Molly saving Trey? We'll find out soon enough, at the peak of the mountain, Molly's lair, in the literal and metaphorical climax of this level. Along the journey we find more notes, some continuing the mythology around the burrowers, and some written by Itchy when he was a kid. Who is Itchy? We meet him on the outskirts of the Haunted Harbor. He's certainly a character. Remember Rhubarb and his weirdness? Let's ramp that up to 100 and add another 15 years to their age, and you'll have Itchy. Itchy has set up a makeshift stand, offering a guided tour through the Haunted Harbor for only $1. In this short amount of time Itchy talks to Hazel, we learn a lot. This town was once the home of Hug and Molly, and this place wouldn't have turned into a ghost town if not for her. She took all of the school kids that Itchy had been growing up with, but not him. A survivor left to tell the tale of her horrors? It seems like it, as he says, she gutted them and used their entrails for... I don't know what he says. I could write it and try to say it, but it might just get this video taken down, honestly. I truly do not know, but the intent is discernible. Hug and Molly is the villain of his story. But then we find notes throughout the town, several from a young girl named Jane. These letters weave the story of the Haunted Harbor. The children here were neglected. Jane was left to take care of her baby siblings at a very young age. In one note addressed to Santa from Jane, we learned that she didn't have shoes to wear, and instead of asking Santa for just shoes, she said he could keep them if he would take her and her siblings to the North Pole instead. A child shouldn't have to barter necessities for their safety, especially for someone else's safety. The lives these kids have to live to be so mature and selfless is heartbreaking to think about. And this kind of pain, of course, left Haints and knots around the town for Hazel to unravel. The visions, however, spin a slightly different story than what the notes have to say. In the first vision, Molly is described as a mysterious recluse that lives in the town, and the children brave enough to sneak into her house were rewarded with new toys and clothes. Hazel, along with the weave design showing children caught in a spider's web, makes it seem like Molly was baiting the children like some sort of hungry predator. We also find some more letters that help paint Molly in a negative light. One that appears to be a nursery rhyme about Molly that's clearly a warning, and two surrounding a woman named Agnes Davis. But the environmental storytelling allows us to know that Agnes was a bit of a busybody, with big eyes and a pair of binoculars on her couch. Another quick content warning as we get back into depictions of child abuse. The next vision helps us understand that we are healing Itchy's old wounds, as we see him being dragged to a log to be beaten with a branch by his dad. The catfish narrates that in the midst of all that pain and suffering, Itchy saw weird angels who promised him a soft place to lay. The third vision might be the most important, as we see a scene of young Itchy approaching a crushed body under a large container, red yarn mummifying the body and webbing the container. The narration says how Itchy was led by red yarn the night before to warm by a fire, where he felt safe enough to confess his pain to the night air. The fourth vision helps us understand what happened. Itchy thought that he was talking to an angel of mercy, one that would save him from his father. And in a way, he was right. But Molly isn't just a healer, she's an angel of justice. This dichotomy we have been seeing in Molly's story is exemplified during this level. We know Molly is a savior from the letters, but the visions show us that she is also an agent of vengeance as well. And this confusion keeps us in the same headspace as Hazel, who is still determined to battle Molly as a villain. However, after she comes up to Itchy after the running section, her voice and questions are so gentle. This is a taste of the growth Hazel has undergone since the start of the game. She's still ready to fight, but she sees Itchy for the victim he is and leaves enough space to treat him with tenderness. Why didn't she take you? Itchy tries to lie, to perpetuate the story he's drawn around the deserted town when no one was left to remind him otherwise. He fought Molly and won. No tragedy. But Hazel won't let him forget. She saw the truth already. It's just, I read once on this website, didn't she kill your dad? Itchy tries to shut the door in her face, but Hazel stops him. Wait. I came all this way to hear your story. The real story, Itchy. The vocal direction for the scene has Hazel calm and mature throughout the interaction. Even her, wait, is delivered in the calming cadence of a friend. And Itchy relents, retelling the story while smoking a cigar. I'm going to quickly mention that he had to put on an oxygen mask earlier when we first met him, so the cigar smoking is actually kind of funny, and it's a detail that's supposed to add levity to the scene. That, along with the nonsensical amalgamation of backwoods southern drawl that spews from his lips when he first begins the story, really helps balance out the constant back and forth friction we've been feeling about Molly throughout the level, bringing us out of our heads and into the story. I know I shook my head and said, "What?" out loud before leaning in and praying the captions would give me enough time to read what he's saying. Sorry suggins who iced in this here holler made the mountain peaks feel as snug as teeth on a bear trap. Luckily, what he says next makes a lot more sense, and he answers Hazel's question. His friends wanted to be taken away from this place, away from the painful lives they had lived. But Itchy saw Molly as the devil, so when she invited him, he was too scared to say yes. He then makes a joke that the only reason why he has the fake story painted around the town instead of his own feelings is because never could figure out how to fit all that on scraps of wood. Hazel offers him a heartfelt release from his guilt, reminding him he was just a kid. Scared by the emotions, he redirects the conversation back to when they first met, asking Hazel if she had found any money to pay for her ticket into the haunted harbor. She reminds him that she thought they settled that earlier with him giving her a free pass. He uses her response to grumble away, ending the conversation. I wonder how he would respond to Hazel's kindness after she reweaves his wound. Unfortunately, we don't get that, but let's talk about this final vision instead. The vision shows us another consequence of Itchy's confession, for after his father's death, he told the town it was Hug and Molly's fault. The town was already wary of Molly, so they took the excuse to go after her. But they thought Molly was an old woman, a recluse, not a giant spider woman. She was still driven away from the town, but she came back for the children. I like that this final vision bends the player's expectations. So far, these final visions have been the last piece in the level's puzzle, the thing that spells out exactly what happened here to leave so much pain. But this one is still ambiguous. It shows Molly as a visibly terrifying creature, something bigger than the wicked old house the Holler people thought she lived in. And the Catfish's narration uses language that lends to the eerie and the arcane. But Itchy's words are still fresh in our minds. The children of the Holler had chosen to leave, and it was a brave choice, not a stupid one. Even after all these years, Itchy wishes he had the courage to let Molly take him when he had the chance. Hazel is still convinced that Molly's the bad guy, seeing the vision and coming to the conclusion that Molly had destroyed so many families, not recognizing that those families were husks of what they should have been from the beginning. To be fair, there is candy leading up to Molly's house like Hansel and Gretel's witch, and that does invoke the image of Molly eating the children she takes. Also, at the top of Molly's house, we find a letter written by Lacey, a recommendation for one of the kids she visited to be taken to a foster family immediately for their own safety. Then the doors blow open, and a direct wind tunnel from the roof of Molly's lair is before Hazel. She hops in the wind and is off. When she lands, she comes across a velvet curtain that parts as she approaches. Behind it is a cardboard cutout of Hazel's house, a life-size marionette of her mother floating down to the scene. It's all very creepy and surprisingly well put together for only having a few hours to set everything up. There are moving cardboard waves for the river, sound effects of her mom running around the house. The house actually falls apart. It feels like Molly is throwing Hazel's trauma back in her face, but my original interpretation was that this is how Molly communicates. She's not taunting, she's trying to tell Hazel what she did. As the lazy puppet drags herself into the river, a Hug and Molly puppet comes and scoops her up. Hazel reacts to the trauma and lashes out at the Molly puppet, and the real Hug and Molly is revealed. Hazel demands that Molly give her mother back, and Molly flees. There is shock and confusion and hurt on her face, and that's what fully sold me that Molly was trying to communicate with Hazel, but Hazel gives chase through Molly's lair. This is one of the coolest sections in the game, as Molly has built a town for the kids she was protecting with her lair. It's a series of rickety houses and cave walls and desperate walkways from one house to the next. In the next section of the lair, there are colored lamps and glass vials, and it becomes apparent that this is Molly's kitchen, cartoonishly large cookbooks next to equally large lighters. You can notice that none of the books are on how to prepare children for a tasty meal. Not fans of Jonathan Swift, I see. Above the kitchen, we find children's clothes and toys pinned up. I see this as laundry left to dry, but there is something eerie about it, like a butterfly display museum. Speaking of butterfly displays, right after the clothes, we find a series of skeletal models and pinned up insects that remind me of a science lab in school. But it could also hint to Molly having a penchant for collecting bones. The ambiguity of this area is strong. We get explicit environmental storytelling that can be interpreted in two ways, lending itself to the confusion around Molly. That is, it would add to the confusion if at the top of one of the rooms in the first section, we didn't find a note talking about Lacey from one of Molly's kids' perspectives. And across the same room is a mural of Lacey, surrounded in sunshine and sunflowers. This is the hint that Molly and Lacey were working together. They weren't enemies, they were partners, protecting children. Molly's the person outside of the system that Jolene was talking about, and this recontextualizes Molly's intentions. Perhaps she took Lacey not to harm her, but to heal her. And we confirm this when we come across Lacey's cocoon. But Hazel is still blinded by her own prejudice against Molly. Instead of remembering that Molly's yarn heals the body, she sees the cocoon as a burial shroud. Molly appears, reaching out to Hazel and Lacey, and Hazel, confronted with the possibility her mom might be dead in that cocoon, attacks Molly. This battle might be the best battle in the game, but it's also the one I like the least. I found myself at odds with Hazel here, and that's exactly what the game wanted. Her attack felt like a gut reaction, not a reasoned decision, and that tension made the fight hit harder. And mechanically, this battle is so much fun. Moving from one phase to the next makes use of the temple run mechanics, with Hazel having to outrun rising cave waters after Molly knocks her off the battlefield and she has to run back. Dodging and weaving while throwing red bottles at Molly is challenging and fun, but I can't help but notice that most of her attacks aren't meant to hurt Hazel, only to incapacitate her. She uses smoke and webs not to hurt, but to slow Hazel down. Defense instead of offense. The music accompanying the boss battle is a jazzed-up version of the nursery rhyme we found earlier, and the lyrics paint Molly in the light that Hazel sees her in. A kidnapper, a grabber of children. The game is not letting go of the ambiguity around Molly even for a second. But after the battle, we get a final confession from Lacey, the final piece of the puzzle. She was drowning. She describes the fear and the pain she was experiencing, but the pain suddenly fades. A flash of red filling her like wildfire, mending the broken parts of her. Molly healing her, like she heals everyone she meets. Hazel comes to many realizations at once when a young girl, one of the missing children from the posters we've seen, confronts her, calling her mean, saying Lacey will be mad at Hazel for hurting Molly. Hazel chases after Molly again, this time to apologize. The kids follow her, telling her to stop trying to hurt Molly, calling her wicked and mean and a bully. Then Hazel catches up to Molly, begging for forgiveness. And then we see her. Bunny, knife in hand, digging into Molly's side. Hazel tries to stop her, explaining how Molly was only trying to help her mom. And the reveal happens. Bunny says, I know, and now she's gonna heal my daughter, and tries the knife in deeper into Molly's side. I told you Bunny couldn't be trusted. Always listen to a catfish who sports the sun and moon in their design. That's what my mama always told me. No, that's not actually a saying that my mom has said to me, but I needed some levity. Bunny pulls out Molly's heart, and Molly gasps. Her eyes flutter shut, and she falls off the side of the mountain. Gone forever. And when Hazel turns on Bunny, Bunny reveals her true powers and her true heart. She lifts Hazel over the cliff's edge using magic and says, You look so much like your mother, but you're more like my feckless son. A mistake. And sends Hazel toppling after Molly. Lacey's alive, but Molly is dead. And Hazel was used by her grandmother like a tool. The reveal is more than a twist. It's the jumping off point. The true villain has been exposed. Our hero is taken down, both emotionally from the children and her grandmother's betrayal, and physically falling from the mountaintop. It's the classic hero's fall from grace. But the transition to the next chapter tells us that this is the turning point. Hazel takes the mic from the catfish, saying that this part of the story is better told from her point of view. The first time I played this, I was too shocked to understand what this change in narration meant, but now I can see it for what it is. Hazel is taking control of the narrative. This is her story now. And that shift sent goosebumps up my entire spine. My hair lifted off of my head like lightning was about to strike. Hazel explains how she was feeling, next to defeated, finding her mom just to lose her again, seeing the impossibility of it all. But she also feels her resilience rising, knowing Lacey would never give up on Hazel. The cycle of protection transforming into the will to keep fighting. And we see how this motif is carried through the next gorgeous 2 chapters, a story that mirrors and enhances the love between Lacey and Hazel. Chapter 10, Light in the Darkness. Hazel wakes up in the weave again, and then she sees her mother's cocoon. Then she sees her mother, laying on the ground, being helped up by someone we haven't seen since the beginning of the game. Rue. He looks at Hazel, then vanishes with Lacey. He then reappears, alone, formally introducing himself, and offers Hazel a coin, telling her to meet him at Kushma's cabaret. I'll explain the 2 of them in terms of folklore when we get to the chapters dedicated to them, so for now, let's stick to unfolding the plot. The next scene is probably the worst written bit of dialogue in the game, simply because it kind of feels all over the place. The catfish reappears, and Hazel is immediately hostile, asking if he's come to gloat. She's crying, and he asks if she's okay. She's literally crying and just fell off a fucking mountain. Anyways, Hazel admits that she was wrong about everything. The catfish comforts her, and this moment is sweet. But then he notices the coin on the ground left by Rue. Hazel explains her vision, and the catfish warns her that Kushma is the king of dreams and nightmare. Rue is his right-hand man, and neither of them should be messed with. Hazel is immediately defiant, saying she has everything she needs, but she doesn't even have both of her hooks. Crouton has to point out where they are, and her spindles are fully missing. It's just, to have Hazel claim her agency in the transitional narration only to show her in full developmental stagnation with this conversation right after, kinda takes the fire out from under the narrative wings. I know she's a teenager, she will react like one, but she just admitted she was wrong and the catfish was right. The conversation is just so confusing if you look at it closely. I think most players would be too busy being shocked by Bunny's actions and wondering who Rue and Kushma are to really notice the stalling, but doing this analysis, it was like a slap in the face. I do want to point out that it could be a possible call to Silent Hill, where the conversations between characters are so bizarre and out of sync, but that may be a stretch. Luckily, we don't linger on this moment too long, as the catfish says it's not safe to argue right then, so he agrees to meet up with Hazel after she finds her spindles, and he finds a safe way out. Hazel comes across another one of her mom's memories, and thank the gods she does, because it really picks the emotional beats back up. It's Hazel's track shoes, and Lacey looks at them and says, "I had to miss Hazel's track meet again because of work." She goes on to explain her dual emotions about having to work. She's working so much to support Hazel's love of running. Sports fees, running shoes, travel costs, they all add up. But Lacey wants to be there. She wants to have the time for Hazel, echoing Hazel's own desires at the beginning of the game. Hazel hears her mom's plea and calls out to her, promising that she will save her so she can be there for all of Hazel's accomplishments. And if the scene wasn't heartbreaking enough, Lacey says about Hazel, she loves to run, says it feels like flying. And now Hazel has actually flown, and Lacey will be able to see her do that too. This chapter, and arguably the whole game, is all about love, a parent's love for their child, and how that love, when true, never fades, never moves on. What we've witnessed throughout the game isn't just a contrast in parenting style, it's a reckoning. Bunny, conditional love and cruelty. Lacey, sacrifice for freedom. Benji's mom, neglect. Old man swap, control. Laurent's father, emotional suppression. And then there's Hug and Molly, who loved those children fiercely and gave them everything she had. This is the thesis of South of Midnight, the conversation we've been having with this story since the beginning. Parenthood isn't a virtue or a right. It's a choice, a responsibility, and sometimes it's a wound. The game asks, what does it mean to be a parent and a person? To want for, to protect, to love your child, when the world is cruel and love isn't always easy. These chapters are dedicated to exploring those questions, and maybe offering an answer. And a vision of Mahalia helps solidify that this level is going to be all about parenthood when she says, "Your mama's worried sick. Apologize to your mother," to the young boy she had helped rescue earlier in the game. He had wandered off and Mahalia had to find him. Then, of course, there's the story of the creatures we encounter here. But first, we meet Mahalia, this time at the end of the journey we originally saw her on, a subtle nod to the fact that we are winding down the game. She made a settlement, tucked in the heart of the swamp, etching out a mostly peaceful life with her white neighbors. The settlement is called Hope's Crossing, a fitting name for a place like this, where the freed can make a new life for themselves. We find another message from Mahalia through a firefly lantern drawing telling us about the settlement, how she's been there for 20 years. In another message, we learned that Mahalia had to deal with Kushma and Rue herself once. One of her wards had fallen into deep sleep that none of Mahalia's weaving powers could undo. Mahalia's ghost eventually leads us to a huge bonfire, one that Hazel says reminds her of the ones they built on the river levees to help guide people home. The firefly lanterns become real, as Hazel must go from platform to platform to collect fireflies from trees in order to light the bonfire. Legacy, light, guidance. Folklores and stories made flesh and carapace. I can't help but think of Moana's grandmother appearing during the reprisal, guiding her back on track. We get a really touching note from Mahalia, describing a young wedding they have for two trappers in their community. Joy and hope fill every line of the note. It's incredibly moving. Even Hazel feels inspired after reading that note. They needed that. Shoot, I needed that. Hazel gets the rest of the fireflies. Or rather, Crouton does, since she doesn't like bugs and all the trees are conveniently places that are too far for her to get to. Girl, you climbed a 500-foot tree earlier. Don't give me that, "No way I can make it over there" crap. Anyways, the bonfire glows brightly. Hazel begs Mahalia to show her the way, and a swamp creature emerges from the water. Hazel is startled, but she understands that this creature is basically a baby, and she tries to calm its fear of her. I guess word of her beatdown on Tom and Molly made it to this part of the river too. Luckily, Crouton comes out to show the creature that Hazel isn't that scary. Hazel names the creature Honey, but says she doesn't have time to play. But then Mahalia shows up again and addresses Hazel directly. "You're a long way from home, child. Remember, you will always find your way as long as you keep those who walk with you in your heart." Hazel seems to kind of get it, turning to Honey and noting the wound of stigma on his shoulder, then offers to play a game with them. I think Hazel needed this break as much as she needed the inspiring message from Mahalia. She is immediately laughing while playing hide and seek with Honey, who can't stop giggling themselves. After the game, Honey brings Hazel to their den, and we find another note from Mahalia, this one about Honey. Apparently, Mahalia found Honey one day, a baby in a cradle made of flowers, with weeds for hair and grapes for eyes. She raised him for a while, tried to heal his aching with her weaving, but only caused more pain. And now Mahalia is asking Hazel to correct one of her mistakes and help Honey find their way back home. Keep those who walk with you in your heart. Hazel and Honey are both looking for their real mothers, and we will see the full consequences of that in the next chapter. Chapter 11, Muddy Waters. I didn't mention it earlier, but since Hazel woke up in the swamp at the beginning of chapter 10, it's been nighttime. The moon is full overhead. The silvery moonlight on the water and plants is simply amazing. The chapter starts off with a scream from a creature we don't see. Hazel thinks it's Honey, but remembers that they really only make giggling and cooing sounds. But Honey feels called by the scream and runs out into the swamp towards it. Hazel follows and sees a creature bigger than even Hug and Molly, and Honey is running right towards it. Hazel follows in pursuit, unsure of what to do next. We can find another message from Mahalia about how Hope's Crossing got burnt to ash. Everyone made it out, but Honey was injured, and Mahalia could do nothing to help them. Hazel will eventually come across a run-aground steamboat, a river cruise liner the size of a hotel, and it is covered in stigma. Going through this ship, we can find more messages from Mahalia about her regrets, how she often thinks of Honey, and how she was never able to save him. We see in messages, as she gets closer to the end of her life, she's giving up her weaving tools so the land could bring them to Hazel in the future. But she's also doing this to run away from the pain they have caused. Mahalia leaves a message for the next weaver that says, and I'm going to read it as a universal message instead of straight from the text, because I think we all need to hear this. To the one who walks behind me, learn to sit in peace with your victories and your regrets. These are the measures of your life. Here is the wisdom to bear them well. Hold true to your convictions, but accept help when offered. Find out how to sew shut your wounds and heal the wounds of others. Lastly, when you feel you've done enough, write it down, spread the word, for the next generation to take up the mantle. You may begin your journey alone, but alone is not how it ends. Good luck, Weaver. Regret, growth, love, peace, death, and rebirth. The cycle of the Weaver, the cycle of the soul. The message rings true. Life is a series of ups and downs, but love and kindness are the one constant, as they are the choices we get to choose through every event, every second. This game is showing us that protection, grief, denial, rage, and joy can all be forms of love. We see it in Hazel, and the creatures and monsters she faces on her journey. And to get to this message, Hazel has a little bit more of the boat to get through, and a boss fight with a giant fish woman. Along the way, Hazel comes across other messages. These notes, along with Hazel's recollection on the history of the ship, weave a tale of historical racism and mystery. According to Hazel, the ship went missing over 100 years before, and it was the kind of ship that she wouldn't be allowed on, unless if it were to scrub toilets. She also mentions while looking over the menu, they were having a grand old time, while the workers were suffering in ways that no one wants to talk about. It's heavy stuff. Meanwhile, my first impression of the boat was, wow, to be a guest on this thing for a night. It's good to be confronted by your privilege every once in a while. Sure, I'm gay, but I'm conventionally attractive and white, so all I would really have to do is... and I'm on. We learned that Mahalia has been helping workers escape their, what I assume due to historical context, is indentured servitude on the ship. After the abolition of slavery in the USA, many landowners and lawmakers made it impossible for people of color to live normal lives, tricking or even forcing many of them into forms of indentured servitude like convict leasing, debt peonage, sharecropping, and migrant labor contracts for immigrant workers. It was a horrible practice. The full scope of this practice is well beyond the bounds of this essay, but if you are interested in learning more, there is a whole documentary series here on YouTube, hosted by Henry Louis Gates Jr., called African Americans, Many Rivers to Cross. I'll link the channel and the first episode in the description below. Anyways, we also learned that at some point, there was a stowaway who was looking for help from Mahalia, and that stowaway had a son. This is the shortest note, but one of the most important because it connects to the visions we can find among the knotted stigma. Content warning. Talk of suicide and child loss. Her name was Ayotunde, and she had heard whispers of Mahalia and Hope's Crossing, finally allowing herself to dream a better future for her and her son. In the vision, we see Ayotunde on the railing of a ship, eagerly awaiting to see the swamp's shoreline. Then a worker spots her, and she jumps, baby swaddled to her chest. Hazel is reasonably upset, praying that Ayotunde made it to the shore. But the music starts to play, the lyrics sung in a mournful lull, and the answer is clear to the player. She risked everything and lost it all. The song and the creature we come across are both called Altamaha, referring to the Georgia River cryptid of the same name found in the Altamaha River. Why they decided to give a Loch Ness-level cryptid one of the most tragic stories in a game full of tragedies, I'm not sure, but it's certainly an artistic choice. The song is somber and lovely, and I can't help but see this as an inversion of Bunny's story. From the remaining visions and lyrics from the song, we learned that Ayotunde lost her son when she jumped into the river, but she made it to the river's edge herself. She searched the night for him, eventually only being able to find his blanket, half buried in mud. She couldn't accept the loss, much like Bunny, and made the choice to fill her pockets with stones and let the river take her too. Her anguished wails were so raw when she found her son's blanket that it shook the night air and made the captain run the boat aground. Grief and despair transformed Ayotunde into Altamaha, and Hazel makes the connection that nature gave her baby a second life in the form of honey. These events are confirmed in the final vision after Hazel heals the knot at the center of the swamp. Ayotunde was blinded by her grief and rage. She destroyed the ship and searched for a century, but she could never calm down enough to see Mahalia's lantern and the glow that would lead her to honey. But she also never gave up looking. Mama will be there in the morning. Honey runs to Altamahaha. Hazel is terrified that she won't recognize him, but lets Honey go. And of course she recognizes her son. They embrace, their monstrous forms giving way to strands in bright light. And Ayatunde and her son walk off as spirits, finally moving on to the next world together. Hazel whispers, "Me next. Me and Mama next." The connection is made so clear, it's like the creators reached into my chest to pull out my heart like Regina from Once Upon a Time. Ayatunde's story is both a blatant and tragic mirror to Hazel's story, and is a clever inversion of Bunny's story. Where Hazel is looking for her mom, Ayatunde was looking for her child, but the love and need to find them is the same. And where Ayatunde made the choice for herself, a release to the river, Bunny made a choice for her daughter, to control. This isn't a glorification of sacrificing herself. Ayatunde spent 100 years searching for her son because she was lost and blinded by her grief. Her love was real, but is tangled with sorrow. We aren't meant to see Ayatunde as an example of pure motherhood, but for the tragic character she is. Everything she risked to protect her child only caused the worst to happen. But, unlike Bunny, she never tried to own her child and their future. She wanted a life that Hope's Crossing promised for him. The distinction matters. The game isn't saying that love makes you good. It's saying that love, when fractured and warped by fear and grief, can still hurt the ones we are trying to protect in the first place. Intent isn't what matters in this world. It's how our actions affect the ones around us. And in the end, South of Midnight gives Ayatunde what it has denied Bunny. Real reconnection with her child. Because she never stopped looking. And when the time came, she was able to see through her pain and embrace her child once more. Hazel sees this moment, sees how close she is to the end of her journey, how close she is to hugging her mom again. Me next. Her wish, reshaped once more. This is such a heartbreaking level, and to have it be so thematically connected to both Hazel and Bunny is simply so well done. Now I want to talk about the level's design before we move on to the next scene in the next chapter. This level feels like an amalgamation of everything we've seen so far. Hazel having to use all of her skills in order to reach every floof and bit of stigma, except for the flying mechanic, but we do get that during the Temple Run segment. It's also a level that uses a Dark Souls-esque design loop, with Hazel coming back to the center of the swamp after every patch of stigma, but a little higher up, spiraling up towards the path that will bring her to the center of Ayatunde's pain. After passing through the knot, Hazel finds herself at a dock with a peculiar lantern strung on one of its posts. Hazel touches it, and the catfish appears, and Hazel asks, "Oh no, does this lantern summon you?" The catfish jokes that she should be so lucky, but then he sees a shadow approaching along the river behind her. He recognizes the silhouette immediately as Shaken Bones, the ferryman. Shaken Bones doesn't have any direct comparison to Cajun or Creole folklore, but the ferryman, or a shepherd of souls, is a common entity across many cultures. Charon, the Shinigami, Yama, Anubis, Heibai, hello Avatar the Last Airbender, and Margurer, just to name a few. We learned that he was once the frontliner for the Steamboat's band, but died while trying to escape his servitude in the swamps. The land, in an act of sympathy, transformed him into Shaken Bones. And while he's never given the title of a ferryman of souls, the catfish tells Hazel that he brings people to places unknown. Hazel looks at the coin Rue gave her and realizes it's to pay for a passage to the land of dreams. Shaken Bones' design works really well here, as it signals to the player that this is a one-way trip. We are going to a place that only spirits can truly roam. The final transition, deeper into Wonderland, and it leads to Hazel's true transformation. We get an echo of the conversation Hazel and the catfish had at the beginning of the level. The catfish warns Hazel of the danger, and Hazel does it anyway. But this time we see a change in Hazel. She doesn't try to fight the catfish to make him see her point of view. She recognizes his concern, but states that she knows she can do this. She has to. And the catfish relents, seeing the growth in her swagger, the true confidence peeking out inside of her. Hazel asks Shaken Bones if he can take her to her mom, and he nods. The catfish wishes Hazel well, and we see her and Shaken Bones fade into the mist. The transition to Chapter 12, The Crossroads, reiterates what we've seen play out in the level before, but through Hazel's emotional lens. She sympathizes with Ayatunde and Honey, but she also admits to her envy when she sees the two of them embrace. She also calls her trust of Shingabones a leap of faith, acknowledging that her own powers won't be able to get her to her mom, and hearing the catfish's warning but not reacting to them. This shows us how far Hazel has come from the beginning of the game. She's still rushing forward, running towards danger, but there's a cunning hesitation with her bravado. She sees her limited abilities and perspective, and is opening herself up to trusting those who walk behind and beside her. Mahalia's lesson is sinking in. This level opens with Hazel's finding a note. It has 2 passages on it from the same person. A woman contemplating the crossroads, mourning her love who had passed too soon. The message is vague on what this place is, but its insinuations are disturbing. She says that her love would want her to live a full life, implying being here and crossing the threshold would lead to less than a full life. But the longer she remains, the more she feels the passage to the land of the dreams call to her, using the voice of her lost love as a siren song. There is also a signpost with arrows pointing to a whole list of towns, most of them illegible, but the one that stands out the most is the town on the tapestry. This first bit of the level will be nostalgic for Zelda fans out there. The crossroads has many different paths leading away from its center, and at the end of each path is impenetrable fog. Hazel needs to follow the path pointed out by the town on the tapestry sign, or else she'll be looped back to the beginning. And even when she follows the right path, the clearings are nearly identical, but each is slightly different, a clever signal that progress is happening. The first time, the sign has been tipped over. The second, we see Rue's wagon and a giant boar. We can also find a new note in the third clearing. This second note tells us that the writer of the first note's name is June, and she can now hear her love's voice calling to her non-stop. She writes, "I miss her so much," before the final entry saying she's giving into the temptation, giving herself to the land of dreams. I wish they had used sound cues for the directional method for this part of the game, like in Legend of Zelda. It would be so fitting, given that we can hear Shaken Bones singing throughout the level. And he's literally singing about following the river to Kushma's realm. But I get that could be construed as a straight-up ripoff of those games. Hazel goes into Rue's wagon, and it's one of my favorite magical tropes of a place being bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. And throughout the wagon, which is filled with junk and treasures, are mementos to the damned, those who had sold themselves to the land of dreams for a fleeting fantasy. Some of these letters are about people consumed by greed and misery, others by grief and consequence. Agatha Leonette fell asleep with a cigar in her mouth and set her house on fire. She survived, and the rest of her family did not. Paul Tiller poisoned his aunt for her inheritance, but it was already all gone. Trudy Moreau couldn't stop her daughter in time to prevent her from pedaling her bike into the street. A letter from Rue himself tells us that he can sense these people's pains and knows they're suffering from the smell of it. At the end of the wagon, Hazel finds a box of her stuff, including her cell phone, which is ringing. Rue is on the other line with Lacey, and he tells Hazel to change before meeting him at Kushma's cabaret. Says the outfit she's wearing isn't her. What's so interesting about this scene is, when he tells her to claim what's hers, a door opens up beside Hazel, and the light of the tapestry fills the other room. This subtly reinforces to the player what we've heard vaguely in Shaken Bone's song. Not all is black and white, which is the theme of this level. Rue and Kushma may seem like the antithesis to the Weaver, the dark, all-consuming fog that chased Hazel through the weave, trying to snuff out the light of her wishing bottle. But this moment tells us that they may be more than that. They're also a part of the cycle of the tapestry. How they play a part in this tangled story, we'll have to wait and find out. When Hazel reaches into the light, the strands cling to her, transforming her outfit into something that is simply amazing. It may seem like a frivolous costume change, but what she's wearing is important. We've talked about the Southern tradition of Sunday best being a representation of pride and individuality. We've also talked about how the outfit Bunny makes Hazel wear is a form of forced assimilation and cultural erasure. But this outfit truly feels like a combination of Hazel, her personality, her legacy as a weaver, and her identity as a black woman. It's very similar to the outfit Hazel was wearing at the beginning of the game, urban strink punk, but it infuses it with ancestral elements, armbands, and white ink tattoos evoking ceremonial traditions. The use of the Guy Ben's quilting style and the hoodie around her waist, and the use of constellation-like jewels throughout her hair, top, and ripped jeans feels like it's a call to the catfish in his bejeweled scales. This is the true hero's transformation, coming right on time for the climactic finale to this gorgeous story. But before we get into it, let me quickly talk about Kushma and Rue, and also the level design because this level is by far the most out there, but it is the land of dreams, so it makes sense. So let's start with Rue, because he is similar to Shaken Bones in that his name and character have no direct ties to Cajun, Creole, or Southern folklore. However, he does fill in the slot for the trope of the demon trickster, a creature who ensnares the souls of the living through lies and falsehoods. The most telling depiction of this trope is the marquee on the side of his wagon, Rue the Magician. Sleight of hand, illusions, trickery, and untruths. That's the type of magic he peddles. Now, Kushma, on the other hand, is a creature we can find in stories around the Mississippi and Caribbean islands. He is the explanation for sleep paralysis demons. He's called a breath stealer, as it's said he sits on your chest, squeezing out all the air in your lungs to feed his hunger. Similar creatures can be found across Europe, normally described as an old hag who rides her victims through the night. Thus, the term hag-ridden was born for those who look particularly tired. The game is remixing Kushma's folklore by calling him the king of dreams and nightmares, and giving him a realm of the damned to rule over. But this realm is so striking it truly works for what the game is trying to do in this level. The level design feels like Bourbon Street in New Orleans, though with a damnable abyss awaiting those who step off the designated paths and shops. Jazz music plays, but so does the distant sound of wailing. And Hazel points out that every house is being propped up by inky black strands, vortexes of weave and stigma darker than what we've seen so far. It also looks like the energy is being pulled down these vortexes towards the familiar-looking smog beneath the City of Dreams. I love the music in this level, despite its disharmony and off-key notes. The dissonance really sells the level's idea of being a place that may seem fun, like a good time, maybe even like a miracle, but it's hiding something underneath of it. This becomes apparent in the notes we can find along the way to Kushma's cabaret. They spin the tale of many souls, many with regrets, many with sorrows and griefs they could never let go of. We get the idea of what happens here. Rue finds those who are desperate enough to sell themselves for a second chance, and they come to this place, and they relive their lives. The best parts, but also the worst parts. Instead of letting go, they hold on to their grief until it consumes them. We see this in the first letter we find, written by someone who has forgotten their name, their eye color, even their sense to worry about all of this forgotten identity. Kushma feeds on the energy until the souls putter out and are replaced by someone else Rue finds. It feels wicked. It feels unkind, especially because some of these notes are from children. One from a girl in a hospital who wants to see her parents and the sun again. But it might also be a mercy. These are the people who can never heal from the trauma they have endured, because they don't want to. They fought long enough and want to surrender to the darkness because it feels familiar. And in this world of dreams, it may not be real. The people they love are there, but they are hollow husks, memories of memories of memories. But the love they feel for them is real enough to keep them content and fed upon. It's just another cycle. One even a weaver has no power to undo. Hazel sees the suffering here, and at first condemns the practice Kushma and Rue are practicing here. But she also empathizes with the souls, feeling her own journey as a reflection of these people chasing miracles. Instead of visions, Hazel can peek into some of the buildings, and we see how the souls here are literally trapped in a cycle of their own regrets, living the memory over to its heartbreaking finale, only to reset at the beginning like nothing happened at all. It's honestly terrifying. I know I said this for the last level, but this one is truly a culmination of everything we've learned in the game so far when it comes to platforming, with lengthy wall runs, flying mechanics, and possible gliding segments. It's so well done and it feels earned. I also love that the sound of the city becomes distant and muffled as we get closer to Kushma's cabaret. I wonder if it's to show that the souls closest to Kushma have been withered so far that they can't even remember how to cry out, or if it's to show how distant Kushma and Rue make themselves to the suffering of their victims. The clock tower section reminds me the most of Alice Madness Returns, with some of the camera angles and animation used for Hazel climbing the gears. We can find a note in the tower that tells us what the clock is meant to represent. That this place is where time is passing by, but nothing changes, echoing how holding on to regret and grief keeps you stationary, even as the world moves on around you. At the top of the tower, Hazel finds one final note from someone who is begging to learn how to let go before Kushma can eat them entirely. Hazel reflects on the note and says, "It'll be different for me. I'm a weaver. I could do this. I have to." This small moment tells the player what Hazel has been feeling since she got to this new place. Self-doubt. Every wandering question has been one part sympathy, one part analysis. She worries she might be tricked like everyone else. But this isn't to represent Hazel's lack of confidence. It's to highlight the cunning hesitation she learned along the way. The understanding she doesn't know everything, and she can now learn from the lessons of others as she finally understands her mother's words. "The world has existed long before I brought you into it, Hazel Flood." Another story loop coming to a seamless conclusion. In the cabaret, Rue invites Hazel on stage with him, and the animation of the scene is so good, even though it's also kind of terrifying. Rue is clearly using some sort of power on Hazel, puppeteering her into a choreography that she couldn't possibly know. But by the end of the song and dance, Hazel willingly bows to the audience. Rue's song is about him and Kushma, describing Kushma's power as all-consuming and immense. But it's also a confession that he is a puppet to Kushma's will as well. This moment creates a kind of kinship between Hazel and Rue. So when she is given a key to step through the door for her final test, a bargain in exchange for passage to her mother, she trusts him. Now on to Chapter 13. The Past Isn't Past. During the transition into this chapter, Hazel explains that when she was in the cabaret, she felt herself being caught up in the moment, feeling the power of Rue and Kushma. We are back at the beginning of the game, the hurricane bearing down on Prospero once more. Lacey hasn't made it home yet, but even with Hazel's knowledge of the events to come, she can't save her mom. The house falls into the river once more, and Hazel is consumed by her regret of not being fast enough. But then she comes to herself. She remembers the fog that chased her through the weave, sees it licking at her hands, feeding on her shame and pain. And she breaks through the illusion. Rue is there, applauding Hazel for being able to do what has been impossible until now, entering one of Rue's tricks and seeing right through it. Rue confesses this was less a trick and more of a test for Hazel, to see if she was a worthy partner in tackling a dreamer so filled with pain. A creature killer. A person whose pain and power could sustain Kushma for generations. As a sign of goodwill, Rue tells Hazel that her mom is trapped somewhere in the realm, but if she can find her, Rue will help her get her out. After beating up some Haints, we can explore the illusory set, and it looks like a stage designed for a play, props used to enhance the realness of Rue's dreams. As Hazel escapes back into the streets of the Dreaming City, we get another Temple Run segment that will stretch throughout the different nightmare sets until the end of the chapter. And these truly are nightmare sets, all designed with Hazel in mind. Train car with her running too slowly behind it, both of her parents on board reaching desperately back for her, but unable to grab her. We see a depiction of Laurent caught in Hazel's grasp. I think the most devastating is the next set of taunts from Kushma. A billboard titled Wrongful Death shows a bug with a woman's face being sprayed by insecticide, clearly representing Molly and Hazel's hand in her death. The hand holding the insecticide is even wearing Hazel's rings. There's also a note telling Hazel how Lacey has been severing the same heartbreaking vision hundreds of times since Hazel started her rescue journey. It's incredibly cruel, and that's why I think these representations and letters are being left by Kushma and not by Rue. Another lengthy running section, we make it to the final arena. Lacey is there, trapped in her own nightmare, watching Hazel jump to her doom into the river, feeling the pain of losing her again and again. Hazel can't wake her up just yet, and Kushma arrives, spreading stigma around them. It's the final boss fight, and it begins with Kushma lashing out dark tendrils at Hazel before sending swarm after swarm of Haints. Instead of attacking his physical body, each Haint we unravel adds damage to Kushma's health bar, and after the first wave of fighting, Lacey wakes up. Finally, Hazel and Lacey embrace. And Lacey sees how Hazel has changed. She's not looking at her outfit, though. She's looking into Hazel's eyes when she says, "You seem different." But this tender moment is cut short by Kushma reforming, and Hazel asks her mom for help, giving her the wishing bottle to hold onto while Hazel unravels Kushma piece by piece. Hazel asking for help, and Lacey agreeing without question, is a closure to another story loop, and it hits so hard. And when the boss battle ends, They work together to get the bottle to the wishing tree that has grown during the battle. At the last moment, Lacey passes the bottle off like a runner's baton, shouting, "Stick!" Solidifies that this is a moment that Lacey and Hazel have practiced over and over again to get Hazel ready for her track meets. Not going to lie, when she shouted "stick," I screamed and started bawling my eyes out. Another loop meeting its conclusion. Lacey's wish to be there to watch Hazel run, being a part of the victory, cheering her little bug on. It also beautifully symbolizes the need for both generations to work together in order to break the cycle of generational trauma. I love this scene. Hazel gets the bottle to the tree, and she is immediately transported back to Rue's wagon. He's calling in the favor he bargained out of Hazel for the key to her final test. He wants her to deliver a hairbrush to Bunny. Why? Because Bunny is the dreamer he was talking about, which felt pretty obvious when he called her a creature killer. He also calls her a name we've seen in a message left by Mahalia, a person called a false stitcher. Hazel asks what the brush does, and he replies it's a one-way ticket to the land of dreams. See, Kushma wasn't contained by Hazel's magic, simply delayed. He would be back. That's why Rue needs Bunny, to satisfy Kushma, and maybe he can get some of the other souls out of there in the meantime. Hazel hesitates, but agrees, on the condition that she never has to work with Rue or Kushma ever again. Rue smiles and sends Hazel on her way. And we move into the final chapter of the game, Chapter 14, Midnight. The transitional narrative to this chapter really drives home the idea that Hazel and Lacey have broken the cycle of trauma they were in by working together. Hazel reflects on how this newfound connection makes her feel, and she feels pride, better and stronger than any gold medal she's ever won. But before she can fully settle into this self-warming pride, there is the matter of Bunny to deal with. Hazel appears in the French Quarter graveyard she ran through at the beginning of the game. I think this really shows how Kushma's world is not just a land of dreams and nightmares, but a land of the dead and the damned as well. Hazel finds her mom in front of her dad's grave, and the two embrace again. Lacey showers Hazel with affection, and Hazel apologizes for the things she said at the beginning of the game. Lacey says, "We have a lot to talk about. Come on, let's go or to Jolene's then." It's a bittersweet thing to know they are going to be able to bond and heal over these events, but also remembering that they don't really have a home to return to. Hazel tells Lacey that she needs to go to the Flood Mansion, and Lacey balks at the idea. "I can't let you go back into the mouth of danger." Hazel doesn't back down, but she isn't being hot-headed. Hold true to your convictions. "You can't see what I see, just like I couldn't see everything you were going through. I have to do this." Hazel replies, and Lacey relents, demanding a promise that she will come back from this, and Hazel promises. They say "I love you" to each other as a goodbye, which is a practice I hold on to myself. You never know what's going to happen next. I want the last words I say to my loved ones to be "I love you." Sorry, morbid, I know, but it's one of those morbid things that circles back to being sweet, I think. There is only one section of this chapter that isn't a cutscene, and it's a walk up to the Flood Mansion. Hazel is contemplating what to say to Bunny, cracking a joke at a fox as a way to relieve stress. I think the joke is also a clever signal to the players to see the animals that are gathering to watch Hazel. We've seen this happen throughout the game. Little woodland creatures like guideposts, watching Hazel as she traversed the road to her mother, mending the pain along the way. Now they've all converged to witness what Hazel does next. This is the defining moment of her life as a weaver. Is she an angel of justice? Judge, jury, and executioner, like Rue and Kushma? Or is she an angel of mercy, bringing light and freedom to those around her, at the cost of herself, like Mahalia and Molly? What kind of weaver has the land chosen with Hazel? This is the moment we find out. Hazel finds Bunny in front of the fireplace, Molly's heart crumpled up on the floor. There's a lot of ambiguity in this moment. Bunny confronts Hazel. "Why didn't it work?" "You can't bring back the dead." "It should have worked. You did something, didn't you?" And Hazel admits to releasing Cherie's spirit from the tree. And now we are left to wonder if it would have worked if Hazel hadn't intervened earlier. I kind of wish there was an ambiguity in this moment. I want the message of all of Bunny's actions being in vain to be pure, not muddied. But it does keep the moment in a heavily gray area. Yes, Bunny stole, hurt, disenfranchised, and broke up families, and murdered in order to get what she wanted. But if it would have worked? Would it be worth it to do all of that to bring back your child? I do love this monologue that Bunny gives. It's all of the inside thoughts, the impulsive things that people think and feel when they are in so much pain the whole world can go fuck itself. When Cherie drowned, I was so raw, it hurt to breathe. I'd see people with those baby on board signs and just want to ram them. This town is full of people who don't deserve their kids. We'll beat them right in the middle of a store. Why are their kids alive and not my Cherie? Hazel sympathizes. Honestly, who wouldn't, hearing that raw emotion of this confessional? But Hazel doesn't let Bunny off the hook, immediately saying that everything Bunny did was wrong. Bunny says, everything I did for her. An echo of Lacey's words to Hazel at the beginning of the game. But Hazel knows the difference between Bunny's love and her mom's. You had no right. You hurt everyone around you. You murdered Molly. Bunny's, I don't want to hear this, is so perfectly rich white woman deflecting consequence coded that it makes me giggle every time I hear it despite the seriousness of this conversation. Hazel doesn't let up, demanding that Bunny needs to change to make up for everything she's done. And Bunny breaks. I can't. I don't even know what to live for anymore. And Hazel folds. She steps away from the firelight, a move that feels intentional, but I can't begin to speculate on why. There is a way for you to see Cherie again. I don't believe in heaven if you're here to kill me. Hazel declines the offer and begins to explain the town on the tapestry, Kushma's realm. She doesn't hide anything. She warns Bunny that terrible things happen to those who can't move on and are stuck in that place. And she puts the brush down, far enough that Bunny would have to stand up and move to it on her own volition. She gives Bunny the choice. And that was Hazel's defining moment herself, choosing the space between mercy and justice. Find your own way to mend the tapestry. And Rue confirms this choice. Bunny picks up the brush, reminiscing on how tender-headed Cherie was, and how she would do anything to brush her hair again. Rue materializes from the shadows and tells her that she can, if she wants to. Bunny knows who Rue is and says, it won't actually be her. Rue says, you won't be able to tell the difference, I promise. The way Bunny says, I won't, makes me so sad. This doesn't feel like a righteous victory. It feels broken as Bunny is. Rue takes her gently by the arm and says to Hazel, there's a fine line between mercy and justice, Hazel Flood. Isn't that right? You chose a hard road for yourself. Hazel agrees and walks away. Then, as Bunny and Rue fade into smoke, the clock strikes midnight, and the mansion, now devoid of the stigma that had been holding it together, begins to fall apart. The comparison to the Cinderella story is prevalent, and is to signify that Hazel has walked back through the looking glass to the real world once more. The fairy tale is over. Well, at least this part of Hazel's story anyways. Hazel runs out of the mansion, and we see Lacey in a car speeding up the winding driveway, just as the mansion turns to dust in front of them. The two hug again, and Hazel echoes what Lacey said earlier. We have a lot to talk about. And Lacey replies, I have the time. The final story loop is closed. Lacey will make time for Hazel from now on, or at least try to. With Molly gone, I'm sure Lacey is going to have her hands full for a while. But with the new Weaver and Prospero, and no more stigma being mass-produced by Bunny, hopefully things will become easier. There is one more scene after the credits roll, and it shows how Hazel, the catfish, and Crouton were reading from a book to Benji the entire game. And it's the book used for the transitional narrative between chapters and the book we saw at the opening claymation. It's a very sweet way to end the game, and it informs us that Laurent and Lacey do get back together, with Hazel racing to go have dinner with the two of them. This was such an amazing game. The anthology exploring grief, regret, and denial through the lens of folklore, the pacing, level design, the nuance in which it tackled its themes, the ambiguity at the end. This is more than an adventure platformer or a Southern Gothic story. It's an emotional beast stitched together by pain, legacy, and the ache of what we inherit. Each level offers a tale of love gone wrong, not because love is flawed, but because people are. Mothers, monsters, leaders, creatures, everyone we encounter carried a wound that the game asked us to look at and feel. To wonder if we ourselves would crumble under the same tragedy, and ask us how we might choose to heal from it. South of Midnight is more than just a stylistic game. It's a tapestry, pun fully intended, made of the golden and haint blue weaves of Southern folklore, generational trauma, and the messy, complicated beauty of love. Every haunting, every creature, every mistake we've unraveled and pieced back together through Hazel's journey has asked us, what does it mean to protect the ones we love, even when love and power isn't enough? The story doesn't offer any easy answers. In fact, it might leave you with more questions with its nuance. It doesn't excuse the harm done by Bunny or Old Swap, and it doesn't glorify the self-sacrifice of Ayatunde and Mahalia. And instead, it threads something deeper. Love isn't a virtue, it's a choice. One that must be paired with honesty, accountability, and grace. And when we fail to make that choice with care, we risk becoming something terrible in the process, something warped and blinded. Hazel's journey is a triumph because she chooses to learn, to grow, to listen. She breaks cycles. She doesn't have the power to fix everyone, and she did some damage along the way. But she has learned to give others the dignity of choice themselves, to show mercy. And in doing so, she becomes the weaver that Prospero so desperately needed. Someone who understands that healing is about erasing pain. It's about holding it, learning from it, and mending something stronger in its place. In the end, South of Midnight is a story about how we carry each other forward, to lead others through pain, through joy, to walk with them in our hearts, through the stories we tell and the ones we choose to change. Thank you so much for watching this video. Holy shit, this is a dissertation, but this game truly deserved it. What do you guys think? Did you learn something new about Southern folklore from this game? What lessons are you walking away from this game? And please, if I've overstepped, firstly, I am so sorry. And let me know what I need to edit out or rewrite so I can stay respectfully in my lane. I am open to learning more about how to be respectful and non-appropriative. Thank you all again for watching. I'll finish this story later.